everyone, and welcome to Austin Startup Week and AI Data Science Track. We will have 5 sessions throughout the day, as well as networking to get to know each other as attendees. And to close out the day, we'll also have a AI data science product and design happy hour at Kitty Cohen starting at 5 p.m. And you don't want to miss that one. So before we get started, I want to introduce myself and share why I'm excited to be the track advisor and your MC for the AI and data science track today. So I'm Navira Abbasi. I currently manage strategic growth for TigerGraph. Anyone who has ever attempted to start their own venture will tell you that data is the cornerstone of building your business. So I learned the lesson the hard way when I started my own business and didn't pay attention to how important data was a few years back. And I did a 180 and joined a graph database analytics company. So with TigerGraph, you can do things such as create a customer 360 and build stronger product empathy and generate real-time recommendations so you can drive more sales and revenue for your customers when they're browsing your site. So to learn more about graph database technology, you can join us for the Graph Plus AI Summit taking place on October 19th. To learn more, visit us at tigergraph.com/Graph AI Summit. The link will be shared shortly. But I am so excited and pumped for today's lineup that we have for you all today. Our main focus, as I mentioned earlier, is on data, and how we gather it, how we use it, how we master it. All of that is going to be packed in today's jam-packed sessions. So we will cover a wide spectrum of topics from AI and data are not only saving lives, but also how startups are able to use crowdsourcing and other methods for building their own data sets. So we have such amazing lineups of startups for today's sessions. We have Yonder, a platform that fights disinformation and protects brands. We have Closed Loop AI, who is a startup that's helping to reduce healthcare costs and improve outcomes. We have MeBeBot, who's innovating on how bots can intelligently and accurately answer customer or employee questions. We have Studio X, where they're assembling world-class innovators to launch breakthrough products. We also have Toloka AI, a platform where you can upload any amount of unlabeled data and get your ML project going in a fraction of the cost. And of course, we also have TigerGraph presenting later today, the world's fastest and most scalable graph platform. So thank you to our sponsors, Toloka. Please bring up Olga Migorskaya, the CEO of Toloka, and who will be providing opening remarks.
Hi, Navira. Do you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Olga. I'm the CEO and the founder of Toloka AI, the crowdsourcing-powered solution for collecting and labeling the training data for the AI solutions. As hopefully, probably you all know that the data is actually the major fuel for all the AI industry and one of the last and major bottlenecks in the development of this industry further. And we at Toloka AI see our mission in empowering startups with providing the most affordable and accessible and easiest way to collect and label training data for your AI solutions. We're actually new to Austin. We just recently opened a small office here at the Domain, and we are happy to join the vibrant Austin startup community. That's why we have decided to sponsor this AI track on this amazing conference. And here are the couple of things and events which Toloka team has prepared for you for today. First of all, our research shows that the majority of startup founders actually have very little to totally no idea of where to start when they are in need of training data for their AI products. And thus we want to tell you more about this problem and actually provide you with more information of how to deal with that. So we would start at 12:15 with a panel discussion where the experts from the local Austin community would share their experience in collecting and gathering and labeling training data for their AI solutions. Then we will continue with a breakout session at 1 p.m. Where those of you who already have any experience in dealing with the training data would be able to share their use cases and experience and how did you solve the problems of the training data. And those of you who share the most interesting and the funkiest or the most untrivial cases will be awarded with an awesome Toloka merch. We have very cool hoodies, powering AI, empowering people, and we will give them away during our happy hour at 5 o'clock. So you are very welcome to join. And then at 2 p.m., we are going to continue with a live demo workshop where we want to show all of you how it is actually easy and affordable for everyone to start gathering the training sets for your AI products. We will show you how the Toloka platform works. And since we want all of you to try it and love it, we are presenting the free promo codes to all the members of Austin AI, Austin Startup Week. My friend Lena will share the link in a chat. You are very welcome to try. And also those of you who are more serious and have bigger plans on collecting the training sets for your AI startups are very welcome to participate in our grants program. Also, all the information is available on our website, which my friend Lena will share in a chat. You probably, those of you who have been yesterday on the Women in Tech event, probably remember her. She's that girl with a baby. So that's actually all that I wanted to tell you for the beginning. I hope it will be interesting, useful, and fun for all of us. I'm passing the microphone to Navira back, I guess.
Thank you so much, Olga. And I have my hi on your merch and hoodies. So I'm going to claim the first one.
Okay. Please prepare your cool story about the data.
Welcome back. We are ready to get started with our first session. We're just going to talk about the Industry 5.0, the next decade's trends in AI. And to lead that discussion, we're going to have Valeria Sadovykh, who's brilliant. She's a leading expert in decision-making and decision-intelligent aspects of AI. She's a digital transformation lead at PwC with a focus on leveraging emerging technology and strategic partnerships to solve organizational challenges. Valeria's expertise in the utilization of AI, ML, and digital transformation has shaped the business's decisions of various multinational corporations across a range of industries. She has successfully delivered business-critical projects leading to enhanced workplace efficiencies, operational decision-making, sustainable practices, and optimizing the customer journey. In addition to her consulting career, Valerie is also actively involved in academia. So she is an expertise in literally everything on online decision-making, decision intelligence, human biases, ethical AI, and the disruption and adoption of AI and ML. I'm super excited to have you meet with her and hear from her herself. Let's bring her in, Valeria Sadovykh. So excited to have you here. Thanks so much. Really excited for this panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Navira. I'm also super excited and energized and so looking forward to it. All right, so a bit of technicalities. Let me share my screen and please let me know if it's visible. Is it visible? Can you see any additional notes or anything? Okay, perfect. All right. So let's begin then. So first of all, thank you for the introduction. And as I said, I'm excited to be here today with inventors, entrepreneur, and technology-driven people. I want to start this session with a quote by famous Albert Einstein, where he said, early 20th centuries, it's becoming apparently obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. But actually, it's not technology that exceeding our humanity, it's us that exceeding our own mind. We should also understand that we are the drivers, the one we're driving the effort and creators for the change. Currently, we live in the most exciting times. It's where the cooperation between man and machine becomes clear. It is also where the virtual environment becomes a real one and machines do the work for us. And the priorities are on the efficiency, cost reduction, but at the same time on how we're going to maintain and continue our humanity. So in my next slide, I'm just put some sort of questions that comes to our mind when we think about what is Industry 4.0 and what is the difference between Industry 5.0? What is the difference in the technology stack? Are we ready for Industry 5.0? What else do we need to learn to upskill ourselves again? Because upskilling is actually an important set of priorities for the organizations and the businesses and the private life as well. Whenever it is coming, are we ready for this? Do we have the right skills? And what is this new era of Industry 5.0 is going to impact on from our social perspective and our ethical perspective? And how I want to finish this presentation, I want to finish this presentation with a bit of fun to talk about it. What is in the arena of startups? Who is doing what? And what are the changes we can see in the new businesses that are being born? So I don't want to bore you much in terms of going into the history of Industrial Revolution, but what I want you to see here is actually the trend of how technology changed. And you can see this every phase, the time frame is getting shorter and shorter. Most of us were actually born during the third Industrial Revolution, where we were just basically excited about the mobile phones, the internet, online social networks, some sort of chats in the rooms. But now we have become more integrated with utilizing smart, interconnected cyber-physical systems, right? We're using Internet of Things, we're using AI, we're using analytics and big data, robotics and intelligent automation in our enterprises, in even more application and devices in our everyday life. Industry 4.0 main focus was on automation and efficiency. We wanted to remove the mundane task from the people's, right? From people's rights. We wanted to make their life much easier. However, we're not too sure that their life actually got much easier as well in terms of the operation and efficiency. And another point about Industry 4.0, it raised really essential themes such as ethical concerns. Automation started replacing human jobs. AI and machine learning found out about their biases. We start having concerns with using our personal and overusing our personal data. So, and at the same time, we start understanding that technology start taking away our social aspect of our life, and we start aiming how to introduce humanization into AI and start actually demanding AI to interact with us at different levels, such as emotional, physical, and spiritual. And this is extremely important. So what is actually the Industry 4.0 technology stack? And even we're saying that it's a technology of yesterday. However, not all of us had an opportunity to interact with each of these tech advances. So the first one, let's start with the foundation. It's actually the cloud computing. Cloud considered is the most important technology. It's driving operational intelligence. Organization can hold, transfer the big amount of data and perform a real-time analytics to drive better operational and decision-making. And small businesses have now an ability to actually compete globally. The second thing that comes in the perspective of Industry 4.0 is Internet of Things. It's criticals. It's not only Alexa that is sitting at home and talking to us and we're changing the playlist. It's actually a network of physical objects, wearable devices that are embedded with sensible softwares that give us the amount of data that is interconnected, and it's heavily used in healthcare, manufacturing, and retail. The third one that is actually raising concern is the cyber security, and it's becoming critical because the more and more data we're using in our businesses, the more loopholes we're creating for people to get inside and threat us, and so replace our customers. our customers, ourselves, and our employees under the significant risk. Another technology that is as exciting as AI and VR, and it's not only about the gaming, but even it's not necessarily that used in traditional operational businesses. However, it's impacted, it's progressing really fast, and the businesses and their organizations start picking up in VR, and especially innovative manufacturing, retailing, investing heavily in it, defense and healthcare, using those tools to actually save and protect life. It's huge. Another one is that probably everyone heard about it, is big data and analytics, huge for businesses. Cloud technology give you the platform, Internet of Things bring you the data, and advanced analytics help you with the real-time decision making. And it makes much better and more insightful decision for the businesses, for the personal usage, that people can progress further. The hyperword for Industry 4.0 is actually automation. And when we look in our life now, the bots and the robots start existing everywhere, as from operational perspective in the big enterprises, and the same as the bots in manufacturing. It's becoming huge for enterprises. There is excessive demand on automation from every single aspect. Another part, which probably not that many people heard about it in terms of the naming itself, additive manufacturing, additive technology. And it refers to those technologies such as 3D printing, rapid prototyping, digital direct manufacturing. Even so now, it still seems like it's not that production ready, because everyone knows when we've got a 3D printer, it does not necessarily provide the insights or the outputs that we're aiming for. However, there is a significant progress as expected in near future. Another one, one of the last ones, is actually simulation. And what does simulation means? It's a capability of system to simulate and create a virtual corpus of physical world elements. And it's been heavily used in organizational settings, because we start having the concept of the digital twin, and it's highly beneficial for product and services and retail manufacturers, because they can simulate the actual presence of the product, presence of the human being, presence of the usage. And the last and really significant that not everyone understands is actually system integration. When we go to the big organizations, we are heavily impacted by the legacy landscape and legacy infrastructure, and hundreds of the systems are running in parallel. So the system integration, our IT business units are investing so much money to make sure that infrastructure can be light and easy to use and can seamlessly integrate the new technology. Unfortunately, it is still the phase when it takes us up to 2 to 3 years to install the new ERP system or new SAP system. So even if we call this technology of yesterday, it does not mean that they will not exist anymore when we enter the new phase. They actually set up the right foundation for us to evolve. So what is coming next? So what is actually Industry 5.0 and why this is such a hype word? So it's basically about personalization and more advanced human-machine interfaces. It's a synergy between man and machines, where human intelligence works in harmony with cognitive computing, leading to mass customization and personalization for end users. Anyone from the business and manufacturing can agree that customization is still not simple. It is not cost effective, and it's not as efficient as we think, right? We can order Nikes online and we can customize some of the design, but that's not what we can achieve in a longer term spectrum. There is more coming. And it's not only allowing customers to get what they want, but it's also customizing their life and changing the normal standards of life. So what are the main benefits of Industry 5.0? The agenda is to bring customization into products and services. In the future, we foresee that each individual product or service will be unique to its intended customers and produce accordingly to their needs and wants. This will help to shift the current problems such as we have in the business, as, for example, precision in supply and demand match. We're wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars on over-forecasting, underproduction, services and products. But bringing technology like machine learning and Internet of Things, companies can capture much more data points, such as media posts, weather reports, economic prediction, and production line, and manage to leverage them and better predict the demand. The second really sensitive thing is the time to market, a reduction of time on market. On average, it takes up to 28 for a new product to reach the audience. In the current competitive environment, with so many changes, we basically cannot afford 28 weeks for the product to reach the market. And we're not talking about just developing an app and uploading it on iTunes. We're actually more talking about more sophisticated procedures where we go through the research, analysis, testing, and then we only be able to take it through there. With the new Industry 5.0, that will be much accelerated and will be exceptionally helpful for drug testing, clinical studies. That's the area where the market time to market is essential and critical, and at the same time it's extremely expensive. The third point is after-sales support and services. We might be thinking that we're reaching some sort of a great stage where we can provide after-sales support, but actually not really. It's still extremely lacking from the research. When we observe our customers and we research our customers, most of them make a comment that after-sales support is not that really great and it's not that really personalized. Sending the feedback emails do not add personalization to after-sales support. More and more companies are finding new, more innovative way to integrate more advanced Internet of Things and AI, as well as VR for information to be easily retrieved and used accordingly to provide a better individualistic, personalized support to our customers. Another thing will be also impacted significantly in the resources and processes. They will start completely being digitalized. Even the human resources we will start seeing more bots in our daily operations. That will help us with the cost of production reduction and improve of the customer satisfaction, because precision will be achieved in a better way. So it will be less actual overconsumption and over prediction, and waste can be eliminated. The last one is labor. One of the last one is actually labor and utilizations. We are in demand for the smart workforce. We cannot afford any more people sitting and doing mundane tasks. So hence, we're investing heavily on intelligence robot performing much more intelligent tasks as well. So even it was done a study from McKinsey that estimated that it will be $5 to $7 million of knowledge automated by 2025. And the last one is quality. Quality has always been a must thing, and it has not been satisfactory. And even now, with all of the technology and applications and feedback availabilities and recommended systems, we cannot still achieve the high level of quality, because sometimes computers fail, sometimes human fails. But with the integration of the human mind and much smarter technology, we will be able to achieve a better quality and better personalization to people. So then the next one is, what is actually the technology stack for Industry 5.0 and how it's different from Industry 4.0? It's actually not that different. It's just much better advanced and has the better power, capacity, and it focuses on customers rather than automation and technology. And when we start, we all heard about the blockchain, right? But we know about the blockchain from financial and supply chain use cases. It will be adapted more for industrial services to provide more efficient and convenient digital ledger of transactions that is duplicated and distributed across the entire network. The blockchain also brought us the exciting era of the cryptocurrencies, NFT, crowdfunding, and crowdlending as well. Another one is drones. Drones has been known for some time already. They've been on the market. However, the business operations still did not uptake on them as much. However, drones will become one of the essential technology for sustainable services operations, because one of the agenda for Industry 5.0 is also to focus on sustainability in environments. And drones are actually the mechanisms that help us to improve our sustainable factors. Another new concept that's rising is the exoskeletons. This is a different definition, but it's actually the robots which is working in close proximities with humans. And those robots will eventually start replacing the human physical labor, such as it will replace people like postmen, delivery men, some basic healthcare services providers, cleaners. That will help again to release some of the labor workforce on more intelligent tasks, to have more intelligent human to operate, monitor quality, and deliver mass customization. Another part that is coming from Industry 4.0 is additive technology, something that comes from Industry 4.0, as I mentioned, but it's more enhanced three-dimensional technology. And expectations are huge for this technology because we are predicting that it will change the way how we see healthcare and science. And for example, we will be able to print organs and body parts in a 3D dimensions and then actually transplant them to a human body. This another part is 5G and beyond, and I think everyone already knows that 5G has been deployed in more than, I think, 60 plus countries and counting in this, but it's actually more about it than just a better network. 5G should help us to allow to have a better groundbreaking mobile applications with a much better low latency speed, with abilities to visually touch and have an audio presence. It will have a massive connectivity and capacity, and it will be able to transfer a huge amount, trillions of megabytes of data, and it will supposed to change the science, and especially quantum physics as well will be impacted because they will have an ability to read the data and transfer the data and have scientific breakthrough. It's actually everything is extremely connected in this technology stacks, because with 5G, we get a better infrastructure, we get perhaps much better with our virtual reality, artificial reality, and aimed for the mixed reality. And maybe like in the movies, we were able to actually touch, smell, and move things around us, but not being physically present. And the last one that I talk about it is the mixed reality, right? The competition in this space is growing fast. And once again, it's not about the gaming only, and it's not about having like a nice presence in the different environments. It's massively used for education, for healthcare, for government security. It has exponential impact on sustainable future because it will help us to reduce the emission associated with travel. We will use like VR headset, AI glasses to augment our skills and deliver mixed reality, whether it will be personal or it will be in professional environments. So once we discuss all of those technology stacks and when we will start to thinking how they're all going to operate together, the next question that comes is actually what is going to be with our society. And Industry 5.0 brings the new term, which is called Society 5.0. And Society 5.0 is completely different to where we are living now. And it's focusing on the comfort of living, resources utilization, smart resources utilization, not just automation, waste reduction, vitality, and high quality lives of our individuals. This is more like a human-centric approach, how now we're coming to technology, where we want to care about not just efficiency in employees, but also about the customers and comfort and the right usage of talent. In addition, Industry 5.0 will have a significant shift in sustainability, as I mentioned, because that's the time where we want to give back to our mother nature, actually, and improve our quality of life, reduce overproduction, reduce the emission, scrap reduction, and continuous improvement on processes and operations, which supposedly should lead to a better care of our environments and better economical stability. In Industry 5.0, we also will have an ability to remove regional, age, gender, and language gaps that envision that will help us to provision better products and services tailored to individual needs and perhaps help a better economic development. But that's not necessarily that easy to achieve because, once again, it requires high investment in infrastructure. It requires massive upskilling from personal perspective, from professional perspective. It requires buy-in from the government sector as well in order to reach this nirvana of the comfortable life, high quality of life, and long vitality. So I think I give you a bit of introduction in terms of what is the difference between Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, but now I actually want to spend a bit of more time and talk about it. Hey, what is happening out there, right? What is happening in startup arenas? Because you are all trying to build new ideas, you're trying to change the world, and you're trying to kind of make these places a better living. One thing I do want to mention to you that you have to always bear in mind that enterprise innovation does not move with the same speed in comparison to consumer innovation. It's always, it's behind by different reasons. It's a complexity in the infrastructure, complexity in operations, lots of people, lots of approvals, governance, and compliance. Of course, we can rely on organizations like giants like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and IBM to make the innovation in our enterprise world. However, the small companies and small startups have a good probability to make a difference in this gap. And it also known that most outrageous ideas, and when people think that the product or services are not required or no need, actually make a massive market reaction. And the next kind of couple of slides is basically my ideas of the startups, not my ideas, the startups that are out there already in the market that making change in the way how we're living and making our life different and involving with us at the same time. So the first one is, I want to talk about digital way of living. Now it's all about digitalization, and it's a digital presence in our physical environment as well. And first example I've got is a startups which has been born in 2020 called DressX. It was an idea during pandemic where the influencers kind of was sitting together and saying, hey, listen, why don't we just create a digital clothing and start like using it all over the place? The idea was a bit strange because everyone was thinking, why do we need a digital clothes? However, people do need it because we all live in a digital environment now. The startup actually raised 3.3 million and it's only in a seed round, and it's further progressed to become one of the NFT initiatives as well. And in addition to that, they progressed to become a digital dresswear for online presence, for the video conferencing, for Instagram posts, TikTok posts. And the another mission is to actually to help with the environment and sustainability aspect, because they putting a specific impact that we should be producing less physical clothes because we don't need it as much. And why don't we start using digital clothes? And it does make sense because most of our now online interaction, live interactions actually happen in the digital world. Another example, which is really interesting as well, with a really different name that's called M, and it's a virtual camera applications that help us to create virtual rooms and also help us to do the presence more virtual, more interactive, more digital. It's used heavily by enterprises to make sure that people paying attention to your content, that the content has got a significant, it's all about the content rather than the speakers. And it's used heavily in enterprises, and it's in Series B, and it's already raised up to 140 million and been just founded in 2020. The reason why I bring statistics in, so I could make sure that you encourage that the crazy ideas do work, and it's really exciting how people actually pick up on the crazy ideas. Unfortunately, none of this I can use right now, but I tried them all. But they are usable, and the people love them. The people love them to interact in the digital environment during the video conference or having a digital closing while you're giving a speech or presentation and so on. So I encourage actually everyone to Google them, look at them, and actually try. The next one is NFT, crowd investing, crowd lending. It's a huge market. The first one is Rally. Rally is a platform of buying and selling equity shares in collectible assets. So basically what it is, you can buy a part of stack in collectible car, for example, or some sort of a piece of art. And interestingly, it's raised quite a significant amount of money as well. It's got the valuation up to 109 million, and it's been found in 2017 only. Digital art. NFT. This is just blowing our minds currently, and that's not that really actually old, probably 1 year on a full operation. And the foundation is the platform, which is quite famous, that helps a new creative economy in new artists, digital artists, through the blockchain to use their work, to sell their work, to create a stronger connection with their supporters. So you can see that even art is changing and evolving, and it's a new beauty around it. Maybe people from third industry revolution might not appreciate it as much, but it's the same evolution what's happened with the different art styles, such as classicism, Renaissance, Impressionism, contemporary art, and now we've got actually digital art, and we can have a stake on it. We can actually also, as a physical art, have an ownership of the piece and then have the rights to sell it, to copy it, and so on. Another one that I find really interesting as well is the human IPO. In a human IPO, you can actually buy shares in regular people. Human IPO lets individuals sell their time on an open market. So basically, whoever you are, you can put yourself out there and people can bid on and provide you some sort of a certain level of income, can bid for you. The more popular you are, the more money you generate and the more higher your shares become. And basically anyone can apply, but of course it's heavily used by some sort of people who's got some sort of experience. They can provide relevant advice, and or they are subject matter experts, or can they even be coaches or helpers or doctors and so on. So also heavily suggest to go and check it out because it's interesting. You can either put yourself out there or have a cheaper discussion with one of your with the people you like or you want to follow. The next one I'm excited about, and I have lots of research done on this, is actually emotional AI, emotional empathy AI, an AI that actually start becoming less compliant and more smarter with us. And the reason behind it, why we start demanding emotional AI, because we are smart human beings. We don't want a compliant machine being next to us. Of course, we've got a huge organizations such as Neuralink that have been founded by Elon Musk, but also there are other smaller startups that making a presence in the market and making the difference how we start using the emotional AI in our everyday basis. And the first one I want to talk about, and it's really, it's been in the market for some time. It's Affectiva. It's using computer vision, speech face recognition, deep learning, and a lot of data that they've got from different tools and systems and Internet of Things to actually analyze the human state in the right context. It's actually been acquired by Smart Eye company for 73 millions. And it's used for driver monitoring system to make sure that drivers that now drives the car are actually in the right state. It also used for the research and the market to produce the new products and the services. And it came out from MIT Media Lab. And I can see the usage of it being quite beneficial for the organizations, for the businesses, small businesses, for the providers as well, and for safety as well. Another one is Up5. Up5 is their mission to quantify happier humanity. They want to understand what does it mean to be a happy human, right? And what happiness is depend on, and whether you're at work, at home, or surrounded in any physical environment. They detect your verbal, not verbal communication, different biometrics, Internet of Things, genetic environment. They use traditional web data, your social networks, and they connect all of those different data points, and they try to understand how your mood change while you're using different data points and how they can influence it. And in other words, they're trying to become like a smart digital assistant. They can make sure they can change your mood so you can become a happier human being. Another one is, I also like it quite a lot, it's a MoodMe. That actually provides insights and experience for emotional economy, which use unbiased AI and artificial reality and virtual reality as well. And why are they doing it is because lots of organizations now move to the remote work and lots of the interaction happening online. So there is a massive gap to understanding human experience, to also understand their productivity, the excitement level. That's why they're using this application to understand the emotional journey during the meetings, conference proceedings, also during the training. And they heavily also focused on ethics, because the faces are not stored, because they analyze the faces. The faces are not stored on the cloud. The faces are not stored anywhere. So it's basically that just define your emotional state and level of engagement at the right setting, and unbiased, using unbiased data sets. And it's also been quite popular now. They been born, I think recently. They still in the seed funding and raised up to 2 million already. And the last one from the collection of my emotional AI favorites, I've got Evermore. And Evermore is the emotional well-being GPS kind of tool that using Empathy AI, and it's using Empathy AI for the young people to help them to deal with their life, their growing up components. And it's kind of like your online virtual diary, like where you can record your voice emotions and you record your daily life captures, and it's stored all in some sort of time capsules, and then it's provide analysis on what triggers the mood changes. And then, and also from psychological perspective, they've got psychologists behind the system that they developed that can identify how to improve your mood, or how for you to progress further in life, and as well how to integrate in the social settings. The reason why those startups are becoming quite popular and usable among the young audience is because the social aspects start diminishing, right? Because we are more and more in digital world. So people start having different difficulties actually to start being socially interactive. And then the next one is, I want to talk about, again, mixed reality, because it's extremely exciting time for all of us. And AI just basically taking the world. And I don't know, I think in the 5 or 6 years time, I don't think all of us will having some sort of different devices where we will be able to jump into different virtual environment. So one of the examples is a Chuch AI, has been quite successful, 20 million in Series A, founded in 2015. And they basically use a variety of applications, and they kind of analyze, it's a computer vision. So they analyze different images, and they analyze them in such a high speed, up to 20 milliseconds alone. And they analyze the impressions, expressions, they use for safety, they use for defense, they use for the healthcare. And I also had this application on my phone, so you can have on any of the board project, and it gives you a description of the project or object. It gives you some sort of, if it's a human being, it gives you the age, it gives you some sort of human state, happy, unhappy, and so on. So that's been quite popular as well. Another one is the virtual reality platform to help with the mental health issues. It's called Psyos, and it's designed to bring mental health treatment in a different kind of virtual environment. So basically, you can use VR to transport yourself to a different environment, and psychologists and mental health providers can actually heal you. That's actually from overseas. I think it's from Europe, and it's been quite popular as well with the mental health institutions in research, and it showed massive progress on the mental health state of individuals. What else do I have? Another one that is becoming extremely popular and also quite a lucrative probably market, and exponentially growing, is the fertility, reproductive technology, and sexuality. It's really good that now in our environment we can actually freely talk about those technologies that making changes in our personal lives. Fertility AI, lots of conspiracies. We all kind of foreseeing that we're going to have genetically modified babies. The interesting fact about it, that China is actually is one of the pioneers countries that's making a significant change into this area. They are creating genetically modified babies. We cannot confirm whether those babies were actually born. The research was going for substantial amount of time, but the rumor has it that they have already 2 to 3 babies that their genetics been modified and they were born genetically as well. So it's really interesting to see, but it's a conspiracy. No one knows about it. However, there are other startups also that are making a change. Maybe the ideas are not that controversial. For example, lots of reproductive technologies made it available that we can do genetic testing before any IVF created embryos for hundreds of possible genetic abnormalities. And that's a positive impact, because you can test embryos before they actually got deployed into the human bodies. And we also expect that in the future, LGBT couples would be able to produce and share the same genes for both parents. And actually, even the single parents could create a child on their own. That's again, once again, we're focusing on the human being and human well-being, and probably extreme individualization and customization for people needs. Kind bodies has been on the market. I think they're gonna go public as well. It's been founded in 2018. They're now in the Series C, and they've got like valuation of up to 125 million. And it's basically, the idea is to provide fertility services in more modern tech-enabled clinics with a seamless patient experience, because fertility services is not necessarily the easy things that people can go through. Another startup, I think it's San Francisco startup, is Alive Health, and they use this AI to increase fertility outcomes. Specifically, they want to optimize fertilization and make it more accessible. So they do enough AI machine learning data analysis so to make sure that the fertility treatment, the IVF treatment, is actually have a higher chance to succeed. Because in practice, it's extremely expensive first, but it also emotionally taxing procedures and with actually really low success rate. And once again, it's been founded last year only, and it's already raised up to 9.5 million in just the seed round. So your ideas can go so wild, but they actually can also deliver such a massive monetary benefits. Another one is on sexuality, and it's Dipsia. And Dipsia is quite interesting. It's a first audio platform that provides you sexual wellness podcast. It gives you sexy audio stories, wellness sessions, sleep scenes. Interestingly enough, the startup, also quite young, been founded in 2018, raised 13.5 million. And who would have thought that that's actually in high demand? We didn't expect that we want to kind of have a sexy stories before we go to bed, but actually people do demand it, because we change, the humanity change, we're becoming more open to our personal life, and it's well accepted. There are lots of innovation happening in the tech space. It's a completely untapped area. I let you do the research by yourself. There are also lots of ethical issues that is coming along with the sex tech, and it's specifically on sex humanized robots and virtual sex as well. But it's something that we evolve in, it's something that we are progressing. I don't think we can ignore it, but it's up to us how we use it and how we utilize it as well. And last but not least is actually data monetization. It's extremely important. Lots of scandals has been happening with Facebook, Instagram, Google. They're using our data. We start producing so much data, but we actually don't get a monetary return for us. We're giving out data for free, us as a customers, but it's actually our personal things. So Invisibly is one of the startups that also founded in early 2017. It's raised up to 20 million in Series A. And Invisibly actually help us to put the power of our data back in our hands. Invisibly empowers people to actually sell their data and make money out of that, and also help kind of sell it to the right audience, to the right kind of subscribers, and you can actually detect, you can actually select who you can sell it and how you can sell it and what type of data you can sell it as well. I think most of you heard of Brave. Brave gives us a freedom of ad browsing, but it's actually made also the same step further, and it helps us to identify how we can make money from our data and to control again with whom and how we share it. And from more industry perspective, it is a leap year, and leap year develops a technology for enterprises to securely unlock the value from more sensitive data assets. And enterprises are struggling with that a lot because they need to use the data, but they have so much sensible data that they're trying to make sense out of it. And that's why they used to use humans to do it, because no one could actually kind of steal the data, but now it's impossible with the amount of data we've got in the enterprises. So leap year using different privacy mechanisms that enables data to be leveraged for machine learning and ensuring that the data cannot be exposed or exploited in a malicious manner. Also have quite a significant monetary value, up to 38.2 billions, and been found recently in 2014, and heavily being deployed by the organization. So this is kind of ends in terms of my collection of the startups and ideas I like. And I do want to finish this presentation with the quote again, because I started with the quote. And what it says, that the most profound technology are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they're undistinguishable from it. And it's been said by my advisor. He's a computer scientist and chief technology officer at Xerox. And this sent a couple of years ago. The word indistinguishable is actually really scary, because once again, we start focusing on our humanization, and it's getting difficult for us to disconnect. And it's not getting difficult, it's already really difficult to disconnect. But we can't do anything about it, because it's evolution. We have to evolve, we have to transform, we have to progress. We are already plugged into this world of AI and digitalization and digital operation. So the only solution is actually lies in the hands of the developers and creators, and us as well, to continue to educate ourselves, but also never forget about the ethical AI principle in procedures. And it starts with the design, development, build, and awareness. And we are the drivers of this, and we are the one responsible to make sure that we build AI that supporting us, but not controlling us. And it's essential that we always keep it in mind. And I'm a big advocate for AI to be good for use rather than for bad. And at the end of the day, we are the ones responsible for our future. And we are the one who are drivers of innovation, and we are the one who will be taking Industry 5.0 to Industry 6.0, and who knows whatever numerology we will be using. So I think that's it from my side. I really enjoyed it. I hope it was useful, and I'm looking for your feedback or any questions. And I'm here for you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Valeria. We do have a bunch of questions, but we have 1 minute left. So I'll just start with the first one, and maybe if you could share the best way to reach you, and we can follow up with the additional questions. The first quick question is, could you quickly list the names of those awesome companies you were mentioning? You were talking about the human IPO. There were a bunch of others, so that was a question that came up. If you could just quickly run through that.
Yes, I can quickly run them. Just give me a second. I think, is it the slides, right? So can you see my screen still, right?
Yeah.
So it's DressX, it's it's Rally, it's Foundation, it's also Human IPO, it's Affectiva, it's Ipvive, it's MoodMe, it's Evermore, it's Chuchai, it's Seos, A-Life, Kindbody, Deepsea, it's Invisibly, Brave browser, Leap Year, and that's it.
Perfect. We're going to switch off to introduce our next phase. But Valerie, what's the best way for people to follow up with you?
LinkedIn emails, whatever it is. I'm always happy to network because that's how I get my research ideas. The more I talk to people, the more content I can create.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Valeria. That was an amazing session. I learned a lot. Welcome back. I am so thrilled to introduce our next session called How AI and Graphs Can Save Your Life in a Crisis. As you're all aware with the news going on lately, that's Hurricane Ida has claimed 50 lives, climate change is real, fires are igniting everywhere. And in the middle of it all is how do we deliver life-saving equipment and medical medicines in the middle of these massive challenges. So this presentation will cover how AI combined with graph database technology is saving lives when our healthcare supply chain is compromised by flooding, wildfires, and even civil unrest. But if you're curious to learn more about graph database technology, you can join us for the Graph Plus AI Summit taking place on October 19th. To learn more, visit tigergraph.com/Graph AI Summit, which should be posted right below. Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Daniel Barkus from TigerGraph, who will be leading this discussion today. So welcome, Dan.
Great, thank you, Navira. Happy to be giving this talk and happy to be talking about kind of an area where I've worked in the past, sort of the healthcare industry, and some of the great things that Graph has provided and some of the great things that we've been able to do using Graph within that industry and kind of expanding out as a whole. So I guess we'll sort of just jump right into things, and we'll start off with what is the healthcare supply chain. So the healthcare supply chain is a lot of things, really. So you may think of it kind of as the medical devices or the pharmaceuticals that need to be delivered at the end of the day to a patient. And the supply chain is kind of everything from their creation as raw materials that are then supplied to a manufacturer to then get turned into that medical product, which then gets stored at a distributor where it's then sold to a healthcare facility and finally admitted to our patient. So there's a lot of steps along the way to get something from raw material to something that a patient can actually use and have a better life because of. But it's not just those supplies and those pharmaceuticals that we have to worry about. Healthcare is also care. And there's a lot of these in-home care or outpatient care programs where a healthcare worker actually has to go to the person's home or has to go to a separate location in order to provide care for any of the services that they may be providing. This can then be compounded with if they have to bring along with them medical supplies or pharmaceuticals. Now we have this additional layer sort of to that supply chain where there's this human that we also have to keep track of, as well as our patient, to manage their ability to interact with each other, to manage their schedules, and all these sorts of things that we have to keep track of to make sure that the healthcare experience flows smoothly from sort of the beginning all the way down to our patient at the end. Now, because this process is so complicated, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved. Obviously, hospitals and care facilities need to make sure that they have enough supply of the actual materials that they need to give to the patients to be able to actually treat them. Insurance companies, again, really are invested in making sure that this process is as seamless and cost-effective as possible, because not only do they have to pay for the costs of this supply chain as it goes, but any sort of patient-related outcomes that may be negative due to impacts in the supply chain. So if a patient can't get their medications on time, that may then cause cascading health effects where they now have to go back to an inpatient care facility, they have to be treated for something, and that's now additional cost that that insurance company has to pay for. Manufacturers obviously want to make sure that there is enough demand for their product and that they're not oversupplying or making too much of their product that they're not going to be able to sell. So they want to make sure that they have a good eye on the supply chain to understand the actual demand and be able to keep up with that demand from a production standpoint. And distributors, again, along the same place, they're stocking a lot of those materials that they're selling. They want to make sure, A, they're not stocking too much, because a lot of this medical equipment does expire after a certain amount of time, even if it has not been used. And they want to make sure that they have enough to meet the demand. So that way, when something happens to a patient down the line, they're not unable to provide the supplies or care that is needed to treat that patient. So taking all that into mind, let's take a look at some of the certain obstacles that really plague the healthcare supply chain right now. And let's really get into the meat of kind of what we're going to talk about here. So the first thing is really the big one, and that's the cost. The supply chain costs account for 37% of patient care cost on average. So take that in, more than 1/3 of your bill for care is purely going to managing that supply chain, to keeping track of those instruments and pharmaceuticals as they travel throughout that supply chain from door to door. You're just paying overhead, that's all. So that's huge. That's a third of cost right there that is going to something which we can start to optimize. So that's already a great standpoint for us in terms of value return that we can get from optimizing these supply chains, and also from preventing people from uh, incurring further ailments due to lack in those supply. Additionally, there are weather events. This is really what we're getting into the bulk of here, those inclement weather events, those changes in the environment, those unpredictable sorts of things. So weather events really affect all portions of the supply chain, mainly the transport portions, which is really kind of everything in between each one of those 5 different groups that were listed before. And they also can affect those groups. So mainly this comes down to that last mile supply chain. So getting the actual product from the distributor or from the care facility to the actual patient, that can really be the main point where this is interrupted by those weather events. Something like a tornado, a hurricane could destroy roads that are needed to deliver medications. They could even destroy or interrupt manufacturing or supply capabilities to actually provide or build those medications or instruments. Which then brings us a bit into supply shortages. So this is something we've seen over the past 2 years with the pandemic and the need for respirators and masks and things like that. There can just be sudden increases in global demand for something, and manufacturing just isn't able to keep up with that at the point that it is currently at. So how can we take a look at sort of predicting those and the ability to quickly and easily mitigate those supply shortages and adjust our supply chain as needed when those types of things come up? Additionally, regulation is something that is increasing more and more in the medical field. Things like pharmaceuticals that are highly addictive, things like opiates, need to be tracked throughout the duration of the supply chain. They need to make sure that nothing goes missing, and that if it does, they know exactly who to hold accountable and how to get their hands back on that missing product. Additionally, there has been an increase in single-use devices within the medical field. So in prior times, pre-80s, you used to just disinfect your medical tools and you're able to reuse them. And we had that technology then to be able to do that perfectly fine without causing any risk to the patient. But manufacturers have started deciding that when people reuse medical devices, they don't sell as many medical devices. So they push for legislation, and now medical devices, a lot of them are single use only. If you wash it, the hospital incurs the risk from using that medical device. So much of the time they're just thrown out after the first use and they have to buy more. In addition, those suds are given a shelf life. So something like even a pair of forceps might be sealed and in a package, but that has a shelf life of 2 years. So even if you don't use those, this is a piece of metal. Even if you don't use it after 2 years, you have to throw it out because you are now liable if you were to use that medical device. And then kind of continuing along those devices, there's the idea of physician preference. So not every physician, surgeon, doctor is going to use the same tools. Just like you need the right tool for the job, you also want to be using tools that you're comfortable with. So certain physicians may have different preferences over which tools they want to use for any given operation or procedure. And because of this, there's really a bit of a lack of standardization in a lot of care facility settings because of that physician preference and the want to be using the tool that someone is most comfortable with. So on the surface, this might seem like something that isn't the best idea. Why are we creating all of this unnecessary need for more individual products? But if we take a step back from that, and instead of thinking of that as the problem and start thinking about the solution to the problem, how do we allow physicians to use whatever device they want to use without incurring a large cost on our facility and their supply chain spending? So that's sort of where Graph comes in. And I kind of have to introduce Graph before I can sell you on how it solves a lot of these problems. So what is a graph database? And to start with that, we kind of need to start with how we traditionally think of data and traditional relational databases. So if you think of a relational database, it is a bunch of tables, and those tables are made up of columns and rows. So each table kind of represents a category of similar data. So in this example here, we have something like an order. So that table would contain columns, which would describe the attributes of a particular order, and it would contain rows, and each row represents an individual order. So for example, a order might have something like an order ID. It might have then the product ID of the product that was ordered, and it might have a customer ID of the customer who ordered it. And if we want to find out more information about that product or that customer, then we can create a join between our order table and our product table, and we can say, hey, look up this product ID in our product table, and we can return some more information, like maybe the description of the product, its cost, or some other attributes, maybe similar products or something like that. Now, this all works to a certain extent. When we're doing something like just going from an order to a product, this is perfectly fine, and those joins are not that complex, and there's really not that much going on. But if we want to do something a bit more complex, then it could get complicated. So say we have a customer and they have a bunch of orders of a product, and that product comes from a particular supplier. But what we want to know is there another supplier around who is closer to that customer who can provide the same products? So what we need to do now is go from our customer all the way to our orders. We need to find out what products they ordered. Then we need to find out the suppliers for that order. And then we need to go back to find any other suppliers that supply similar products. And then finally, we'd have to jump around and check our location to make sure that they were actually closer to our customer. So already now we have a bunch of joins going on between all of these different tables, and we're starting to get a really complex query just to be able to traverse this relatively simple question that we want to ask. And this is really where graph comes in. So graph is the idea that data is connected to each other. And we know that it is because that's how we as humans think about data. Things aren't just a standalone piece of data, it's data within a context. Graph allows us to add that context to our data by forming these connections between our different data. So in a graph, we have vertexes and edges. Vertices are connected by edges, and because this is a property graph, we can have different types of vertices. So to show an analogous example to our relational table, we would have a vertex type called order. An order would contain a unique vertex for each one of our orders. And that vertex would have attributes which describe that order. So in a way, our vertex types are analogous to our tables, our vertices are analogous to our rows, and the attributes that those vertices contain are analogous to the columns in our traditional relational database. But where the real power comes in here is that when you define your graph schema, when you say how you want these things to interact, when we say, I want my order nodes to point to a product because I'm ordering a product, when I say I want my order to point to a payment because I need to accept that payment, and that customer also needs to point to the payment because they're the one that makes the payment. Now you can see how these start to relate to each other. You can see those edges and how they make sense within the context of the data. So now when we load in our data into this schema, it creates those edges for us. It essentially pre-computes the joins that we would be doing at query time as we're loading in our data. So instead of now having to do all that complex computational work and write those complex queries when we want to get the results of our data, that is done automatically for us when we load our data in, and we can just traverse those edges when we want to gain actual insights. And depending on the type of graph you're using, that is extremely fast. In TigerGraph, all of that data is stored in memory, and those edges are just pointers between different memory locations. So you can traverse huge amounts of data through these very complex relationship structures very quickly. But what does that mean for our healthcare supply chain? Well, it really allows us, if you think about it, the supply chain is already a linkage of all these different links together. And that's kind of already what graph is describing, is the way that different things connect to each other and how their relationship and their connections affect their ability or the overall system as a whole. So by combining our different sources together, into our different manufacturers, distributors, facilities, and people, we can now see sort of the flow of the supply chain. We can see not just how one manufacturer interacts with one distributor, we can now see how all of our distributors interact with all of the different manufacturers and how any changes in our supply chain will propagate. And because of that, because we're creating these edges, we're essentially creating additional data. This data was already there, it just wasn't explicit in our relational database. We had to write those joins to kind of extract that data. But because of that graph schema, we're already extracting that data when we load it in. So we're essentially we're essentially extracting that additional data. And by creating a graph from it, we're building something that is greater than the sum of each one of its parts. So how does this help our supply chain? Once again, these natural connections between our data sources allow us to look at our supply chain with a higher degree of transparency than we were able to before. Now, instead of sort of just seeing the point where you're ordering from, we have the ability to look even further back. Who is supplying that material? Who is building that product? And what other distributors are they shipping to? What options do we have with our supply chain? And that's really the bulk of what graph brings is those options, the ability to see the options, the ability to assess how those options and those different outcomes will affect the graph. And one of the cool things here is that we can go in either direction. And what does that mean? So supply chains really do work in both directions. So at our supply side here, if we have some sort of shortage of raw material, that's going to affect how much of a product we can produce, and the reduction in the quantity of that product is going to propagate down the supply chain. Our distributors aren't going to be able to stock as much, which means that our facilities aren't going to be able to order as much. And if they're already kind of used to the quantity that they were ordering and that's what they planned on being available, now suddenly they have a shortage on hand. Now we have people who can't get their medication. Now we have people who can't have their surgery performed because we don't have the equipment. Now we have people who are stuck at home because we don't have the ability to send care professionals to go treat them for the ailments that they need to be treated for. And this is bad, obviously. So we can see how those issues from the supply side sort of propagate down the chain and how they affect the people at the end. But we can also go back from the people. So now suddenly there's some sort of, maybe it's a particularly bad flu year, or particularly there's been some sort of milk crate challenge going on where a lot of people are falling down and breaking their arm or something like that. And suddenly we have a large influx of need for splints or for other medical devices which may help with that purpose. So suddenly now we're starting at the people end. There's a huge influx of demand. We can see how that affects those care locations as we go in through there. And then we can see then how that propagates and affects the actual supply that those distributors have, and how that then puts additional pressure on manufacturing to be able to keep up with that now increased demand, or with the distributors to get more supply from those manufacturers. So we can kind of approach our supply chain from either end, and we can even start in the middle if we want to with this graph solution. Additionally, though, graph allows us a lot of process automation. So when these things come up, these weather events, these events like political unrest or things that may disrupt the supply chain, we need to be able to pivot as quickly as possible, especially when people's lives are on the line, when we're dealing with things with expiration dates, when we're dealing with medication that needs to get delivered to people on time, otherwise they lose out on their care. We need to be able to pivot quickly. And when you're looking at the supply chain as kind of each one of its individual aspects, you don't really have that ability. You have to do a lot of manual work to bring that together, to see which distributor you should switch to see how the changes in pricing or availability are going to affect the services that you're able to provide to those patients. And it's a lot of work to kind of have to take those things individually and try to combine that information to get your end result. But with Graph, everything's already connected. We now have the ability to just write a query, relatively simple query that traverses those edges and does that logic for us. There's no more hands-on having to go between these different data sources and manually look at how all of this information ties together. The graph does that for us. And that really allows us the flexibility in supply. We are no longer stuck on this situation where if something happens, there isn't the ability to react in time. Where Graph affords us the ability to run that query, to have an answer in 45 minutes instead of a couple days or a couple weeks, to quickly make that changes to the supply chain before, that hurricane ever even hits. How do we get medicine to someone who's going to be most likely have their road flooded within the next couple of days? They need their life-saving medication within that time frame. We can see that that's going to happen. We can pivot our supply chain. We can deliver that medication early, or we can arrange a secondary location kind of for the delivery of that medication where the patient is able to actually get to it. And with the physician preference, again, this was something where you may have most of your supplies for your particular practice come from supplier A. But you have a few physicians who really prefer using these tools from supplier B. So now when you order supplies, you have to place an order with supplier A and you have to place an order with supplier B. Well, with kind of this graph view, you can now look and say, what else does supplier B provide? Do they provide those same tools that we're buying from supplier A? Can we just switch this entirely over to supplier B? Or can we even look further at even more suppliers and see if we can find a better rate for some of these materials and kind of pick and choose where we want to order things from, because we now have this broader knowledge of our supply chain and we have the ability and the flexibility to, on a week by week, day by day, month by month basis, change who we're going to get that supply from so we can optimize for our current situation. So looking at supply shortage, this is one of the big ones and something that we've been seeing, like I said, recently, the past 2 years with the pandemic and the need for these medical devices such as respirators and masks. So what happens when one supplier is unable to provide? How do we mitigate those risks? How do we look for other suppliers or find a way to maintain the same volume of manufacturing and, at the end of the day, product that we can deliver to the patient? And Graph allows us to do that by sort of letting us manage that supply chain, letting us manage who supplies us with materials and giving us the insight so that way we can see, there's some sort of inclement weather, there's some sort of shipping ban that's going to be occurring on one of these suppliers. How can we react now proactively? How can we look at other suppliers? And because they're already within our graph, they're already within that chain that we have visibility of, we can quickly adapt now. So supplier A, we typically buy 10,000 quantity from, but something happened and now they're able to produce 0 quantity. Okay, well, supplier B and C are kind of our fallback, but each one of them is only able to produce 6,000 quantity. We still need 10,000 quantity, so we need to figure out how we can, effectively purchase from both of those suppliers. But, if we could purchase from those suppliers the whole time, there has to be some reason. Maybe they're more expensive. Okay, so now we're paying more, but we're still able to produce our product. So how much do we have to increase the price of our product, and how much does that affect the price of care down the line? And these are all things that would be very difficult to try and figure out in a traditional sense. But because we have that chain, because we have that linkage and those connections throughout the graph, we now have the ability to say, we're going to see an increase in, a $2 increase in this particular supply component that we need, that will then lead to a $10 increase in the end product that we're producing. And at the end of the day, that's going to be a $50 increase in the cost of care for this patient. And that's something that we have now before we even need to switch over our suppliers, while we're still thinking through this process, because we know that this lack of supply is coming. We have these numbers before we've even had to pivot. We know what's going to happen essentially before it has happened, because we have the flexibility to see how everything affects down the line. And additionally to that, graph our graph supply chain doesn't just have to be a supply chain. One of the great features of graph is the ability to connect these disparate data sources together. So while each one of those individual elements in our supply chain is kind of this disparate data source, there's nothing preventing us from bringing in additional data or from augmenting that data in a way. So say we have a catalog of products that a manufacturer produces. Okay, well, we can take a look at the description of those and we can run some NLP on them, and we can now extract out keywords that describe that product. So we can see that this is a splint for fingers. Okay, it's a metal splint for fingers from this manufacturer. We're going to need a bunch of we're going to need a bunch of finger splints, and that manufacturer isn't able to keep up with that. So how do we find an alternative? We don't need the exact same metal finger splint. We just need something that will accomplish the same purpose. It could be wood, it could be some other material. I mean, it's going to be metal nowadays, but for the sake of this example, say a wooden finger splint would be just as effective. Well, because we have that information in our graph, we have that supply, we have that manufacturer, the products that they manufacture, and we now have these descriptions of those products. We can say, find me other products with a similar description. Find me compatible products within the graph. Find me the manufacturers that make those products. And now how can we adjust our supply chain to be consuming from those manufacturers instead of the initial manufacturer that we were looking for with the product that's no longer in stock? So those are the kinds of questions we can start to answer. But what we're really about here is kind of the weather and how these inclement things really affect us and the end consumer at the end of the day, and some of the more advanced supply chain adjustments that we can make using graph. So like I was saying before, weather affects all sections of the supply chain. Anywhere where there is transport, so really any of these edges here are transportation stages where the product is being transported to the distributor, it's going from the distributor to the care facility, and the care facility is somehow delivering it to the patient. So all of those transportation stages can obviously be affected by inclement weather. Roads can get shut down, flooded, things like that. So how do we manage that? And this kind of comes from prediction. Like I was saying before, we can bring in more info to our graph. There's no reason that we just have to have this stuff. So we can bring in weather data. We can also bring in location data. So now we see, oh, there's a forecast in 5 days. We think we're going to get heavy rainfall in the location where this patient needs their medication delivered. We have plenty of the medication in stock. We have a delivery already going out there tomorrow. Let's just throw this stuff on that delivery. We'll get the medication to our patient beforehand. And now they have it in time for when they need it, even in the event if there is some sort of catastrophic delay in that delivery. So we now have the ability to do that. And most pharmaceutical delivery companies, most healthcare companies actually have meteorology departments that are responsible for looking at this type of thing, for looking at the inclement weather, and for trying to prepare for these types of situations. So by using graph, we can really empower them to be able to get a much better understanding of not just what is going to happen, but how they can adjust their supply chain to mitigate the risks from those inclement weather conditions. And sort of in this case, we can see in the case where we're looking at an alternative pickup location. So our patient A usually gets their medication from a pharmacy that's within the same town as them. It's convenient for them, and that's what works 99% of the time. But there's been a disruption in the supply chain where there's been an inclement weather incident, and the delivery from the distributor to that pharmacy is no longer going to make it on time. So that patient is not going to get their medication from that pharmacy on time. What we can do is say, we have another distributor, they have that medication in stock in excess, and they ship it to a separate location which is not affected by the weather incident, which affected person A. So we can now see within that radius of the person, there is still some stock within this location, and we can say, hey, go to city B. This is not optimal for you, we're sure, but it's certainly more optimal than not having your medication. So this is your fallback location. This is where you can pick up your medication, and we have that transparency to the person. We can even go through steps here where potentially that person's not able to make it to that city. We can adjust our supply chain, and we can say we can have someone deliver it to you. We can have one of those care professionals bring you your medication from this other location because we know that you're not going to be able to pick it up. So that's great and all. Graph already is starting to sound like a great idea, and it seems like it can do all of these wonderful things for us to help us improve our chain. So where does this AI aspect and this machine learning come in? And this comes from builds off of the idea that as we bring things into graph, we can extract more information out of them, right? We now have those edges. We have those edges which represent these connections between things, and that essentially is also data that we can use. So we can use graph algorithms to generate features based off of those edges. So no longer do we just have a unique subset of orders, but we can now see that each of those orders goes to this particular set of locations. And for each location, here's the average cost of orders that go there. This is information which we can now include within our features that we use to train our machine learning model for whatever the purposes that we're looking to do. Maybe we're using it to try to predict the impact that weather will have. So if we feed it in forecasts and it has a past history of how weather has affected the supply chain, now we can start to assume how weather is going to affect certain parts of our supply chain, and we can sort of run simulations to see what that will do to our given patient population, or potentially the profitability of a facility or distributor. Additionally, machine learning is great at kind of recognizing theft and fraud. So within our supply chain, we would hope that it would be ideal. But like I said, there's been a lot of sort of medications that go missing somewhere along the supply chain. Where do they go? Where in the supply chain are they missing? And can we catch areas where this repeatedly happens? Can we look at that supply chain? Can we see that we're shipping 300 quantity from the manufacturer to the distributor, but the distributor only ever gets 280 quantity? Where's that extra 20 going? Where in the supply line is that being left out? And how can we recognize those situations based on the downstream effects that are already happening, right? So if a facility has been able to consistently provide a certain type of medication or medical equipment to all of its patients, and we see that not much has changed in that patient population, there's not any increase in demand in that, but that facility is now having trouble keeping up with the supply that they need to give that to those patients. We can start to see there within the supply chain that there's something going on. There's this unnecessary lack of supply, and we can now start to propagate back through the supply chain, find where that originates, and then begin investigating sort of what is going on there and what may be causing that lack of supply, when we know that it's not sort of any of those external factors that we're already looking at. And due to that, kind of the machine learning gives us that ability to predict our supply chain. With these graphs, with the features, being able to train a machine learning model on it, you're essentially creating a digital twin of your supply chain. So you can kind of tweak those variables, change the price of things in the supply phase or the manufacturing phase, and you can see exactly how those price changes or timeline changes in terms of production propagate down the supply chain and directly impact the cost of care that the customer or the insurance company at the end of the day is paying. So at the end of the day, what we end up with is something along these lines: a new type of supply chain management, where we have our graph, we have those rich connections between our different suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, facilities, and patients. And we're able to bring all of that together, extract those machine learning features out of it into a larger, more rich data set that we can then feed into a machine learning model, and then use the results from that model for whatever you're trying to build. If you just want a dashboard, so that way you can sort of gain better insights, go for it. If you want something that attempts to predict supply impact due to crop seasons of particular plants that are used to make medications, you have the ability to do that now. So it's really kind of the sky is the limit from here. Once you have that data, once you have it enriched with those graph connections, and once you have your model trained, you really have the ability to do whatever you want, whatever the end goal is that you're looking to get here. And this really helps bring together the supply chain as a whole system. The way that we've been viewing it right now is sort of these disparate sources, each location within the supply chain. But it's not that. It's not these separate things that all operate independently of each other. It's this chain, this group of things that link together, that interact, and that affect each other throughout the entire chain. So we kind of have what happens there, but where can we go further? Obviously the solution sounds good, where we now have the ability to predict how changes in our supply chain will affect people, and we can proactively adjust our supply chain to help mitigate those risks. But where can we go from there? And that's where just-in-time delivery comes in. We're starting to see a trend in reduced delivery times. I mean, we were all there when Amazon introduced Prime, and 2-day delivery became something that was the norm. So what's next? How do we beat 2-day delivery, and do we need to? Well, in the terms of these medical situations where we have these drugs and these devices that expire, yes, we do need to get better than that, better than 2-day, better than whatever. And a lot of the issue here is in the inventory stage. So a manufacturer will produce a large quantity of a particular item or drug that will get sent to the distributor, where it'll sit there until it's needed, when the facility buys it up, and then we're good. But the issue is that if that distributor misestimates how much of that particular product they need, then now they have a bunch sitting on the shelves. That's essentially going to expire, and it's going to be wasted money on their part. So now that distributor has incurred some losses from that, they need to make up for those losses, which will inevitably lead to increases in prices further down the line. And that's just not good for anyone in that type of situation. Additionally, all of that storage creates an overhead in terms of property or storage space that is needed to hold all of that inventory. So with Graph, we now have that visibility to our entire supply chain. There's no reason that our demand from our people our patients has to go all the way through all these different steps just to make it back to the manufacturer so they know how much to produce. That demand should be transparent to the manufacturer, so they're always producing exactly the amount that it's needed, and they're minimizing on the waste that is incurred by having to store these things in places for long periods of time, or even just the extra steps in the supply chain where it then has to go to a distributor and then to the pharmacy and then to the patient. So something like this might look like a direct to manufacturer solution. And this is something that is certainly starting to be pivoted to in the healthcare supply chain world and kind of in a lot of other industries that we see now. We're sort of skipping out on the middleman, that distributor, and you're buying the equipment directly from that manufacturer. What that does is that removes a whole nother element from the supply chain. And by removing that element, not only do you remove just that storage, that overhead there, but also the transportation between that element. So you no longer have to go from your manufacturer, you no longer have to transport it to a distributor who then transports it to the physician. It's just straight from the manufacturer to the pharmacy. And that's great. But we can even go a step further. There's no need for you to pick up your medication from a pharmacy, right? Why can't that medication just be delivered to you? And in a lot of ways it is. We have plenty of mail delivery pharmacies where you can get your medication delivered to you. So why do we really even need to go through that pharmacy? Why can't I just present my physician to the people who actually present my prescription to the people who actually make the drug, and they can ship it directly to me? So that's kind of the way that we can take a look at this supply chain as a whole, see what areas really affect our supply chain, what is actually necessary here, and what is just bringing us these unnecessary costs and unnecessary time and complications that we have to account for when we're managing our supply chain, and how do we trim the fat with that? So sort of that direct connection is really what we're going for, this vertical integration, the ability for the patient to be able to transparently share their demands with the manufacturers. I need this, manufacturer says, okay, we'll produce that, and you have essentially what is a just-in-time delivery. This is produced not as an individual unique item just for you, but in terms of its quantity, it is produced just for you. It is produced because you need it, not because it's going to sit on a shelf somewhere and maybe get used. Additionally, this just helps with the per quantity ordering. So I'm sure we've all been there where you need only a few of something, but they sell it only in a box of a lot of something. So you're going to buy that box of a lot of something, and a good portion of that are going to either not get used, or in the case of these medical devices, spoil because they're not getting used. So if you only need 3, you have to buy 10, you're going to waste 7 of them. That's unneeded waste, unneeded cost on your end. And in a way, that also creates artificial lack of supply, because if you only need 3, yet we can only get them in quantities of 10, then now there's 7 of these, which are just not on the market for other people to be able to use, but we're in a way hoarding them and have no use for them. So that's just some of the things that the graph supply chain will allow us to realize, will allow us to process that type of information and make those traversals throughout the supply chain in order to make sure that we are providing patients with the cheapest, most effective, and most on-time care that they can possibly get. So that is the bulk of what I had. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these topics, and look forward to sort of hearing what you think and where you think Graph can help affect your supply chain or really help you manage your disparate data sets going down the line.
Yeah, so Dan, I have a question for you. Wonderful session. Thank you so much for teaching us. So what are the 3 things you hope people take away from your session, particularly for startups? I think there's a lot that big manufacturers can clearly benefit from Graph and AI, but I was curious, what are your 3 takeaways that you think startups can take away?
Certainly. So first, supply chain management like this isn't just for the big players. Everyone needs a supply chain. We're all working on this. And with Graph, you kind of have the ability to distill that down to something that a smaller company or a smaller person can interact with, because it's no longer these hulking different pieces that you have to interact with. It's kind of this one solution all in one place. But really the power of Graph comes from the ability to combine those disparate data sources. That's what I want you to get out of this, is that, while I talked about supply chain and healthcare, if you have additional data sources, if you have things, to kind of go with healthcare again, just because that's my domain, but if I have healthcare claims, how often is someone getting treated for what they're being treated for? And I have data from something like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch where I can see how active they're being. Now I can bring this data together and I can see, okay, does the activity level of people actually affect how much they cost in healthcare claims? If someone's much more active, what are the claims that we're seeing fewer of? How does this directly affect care? And how can we kind of then incentivize people to be more active if we do have these results in care? So it's more about being able to take these separate data sources that you already have and view them as a whole. That is the takeaway I want people to get from this, is that Graph allows you to get the most out of the data that you have. Period. And it's the way that we think about data. It's the way that your brain works. So it only makes sense that we should be interacting with our data in the way that we're used to interacting with environmental data, the way that our eyes see things, that we feel things, that we relate concepts to each other in our head. It just makes sense that we store our data in that same format as well.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up the session. Thank you so much, Dan, for all this amazing information. And it's clear to me that I think, to your point, startups can massively benefit from AI and graphs by intelligently managing their supply chain, as you're mentioning, for their components. I know there's like a chip shortage going on right now, and I'm sure that's a vital piece of hardware that goes into a lot of products and also managing shipping. I think that would be ideal to be able to get shipping down to even just a few hours of placing an order. I mean, I'm sure Amazon's trying to figure that one out. And you were just mentioning just-in-time inventory. And I think that could really help give some startups a leg up in surviving if they can lower their costs and managing their inventory. So I'm just imagining, shipping during a snowstorm in the middle of Christmas as a startup, where it could really make and break you. I'm sure there'll be a lot of angry customers can be curtailed by getting ahead of that curve. I don't know if every startup can afford their own meteorology department or their own weather person to predict that. But then especially which grocery stores and paper good manufacturers were using graphs and AI when COVID hit. That would have been nice.
Yeah, certainly.
But thank you so much, Dan. Now we're going to transition to our networking portion in Hopin. So to network with other attendees, press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen, and you will randomly be paired with another attendee, and we'll have 5 minutes to chat with one another. And if you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, click on the connect button at the bottom. And then of your screen, and you will both receive an email from Hopin to help you both. Welcome back to our next upcoming session, Entrepreneurship in the Age of Data Ownership, and how crowdsourcing empowers AI-driven startups. So we're here to talk about the challenges almost every AI startup faces, yet almost no one really talks about. How do you get enough quality data to train your algorithms? In a chat with industry experts, we will talk about various ways of harvesting data in budding and growing businesses, and how crowdsourcing can empower entrepreneurs to become data owners, whether they're working on their MVPs or scaling their success. So, all right, let's bring up our amazing speakers here today. We have Olga Megorskaya. She'll be our moderator for the session, and she's the CEO of Toloka AI. We have David DiCaprio. He's the founder of Closed Loop AI. And we also have Robert Matney, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Yonder AI. And Beth White, the founder of MeBeBot. Super thrilled to have such amazing leaders and founders to be here today. So take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to see you all here. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to the audience for coming to our event. If you don't mind, I will share the screen with a presentation and we would start. Okay, I'm sharing my presentation. Okay, I am launching it full screen now. So here we go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Olga. I am the CEO and founder of Toloka AI, the crowdsourcing platform aimed to provide startups with training data for the AI. And today we will be discussing the questions of entrepreneurship in the age of data ownership and how the crowdsourcing empowers AI-driven startups. Today, together with me, I'm happy to welcome our guest speakers and experts from the local Austin community, Beth from MeBeBot, Dave from Closed Loop AI, and Robert from Yonder. It would be very interesting to listen to their experience. But let me start with a brief overview. First of all, about our platform, the Toloka. We are new to Austin, actually. We just moved in recently and just rented an office here at the Domain. And we are happy to join the vibrant Austin startup community. Toloka itself is a global crowdsourcing platform which unites more than 200,000 monthly active users all over the globe, covering more than 100 countries and more than all the major languages spoken in the world, to deliver high quality data production for AI-driven companies worldwide. I encourage you to follow the link by the QR code where you would find more information about Toloka, and what is more important, you would find there the opportunities for free trial of our platform using the promo codes and the grant program for those who want to establish their data production for your startup. So what we see in the industry is that actually the world is getting obsessed with the AI startups. From the year to year, we see the constantly increasing level of investments and millions and billions of dollars invested in many different companies which are driven by the AI. And comparing to other technologies, AI now is probably the most popular in terms of raising investments. We see thousands of investors investing money to thousands of companies every year. But when we look at those fancy success stories of new booming startups, there is one question that for some reason is often overlooked, is the question of the data which powers their AI solutions. I always say that AI stands on three key pillars. These are hardware, algorithms, and the data. And while the first two have already become commodities on the market, the data is still a bottleneck, and I would say the major thing that actually defines the unique properties of the AI-driven product. Because while the first two parts are equally accessible to all the players on the market, it is the unique data set which actually, to a great extent, defines the unique properties of your product. So there are different ways to actually get the data. If you are just starting your business and you have an idea of the product, so this is where lots of you are starting with, like, okay, where do I get the data? And there are different ways to get it. You can use some open data sets. You can buy the data from the partners. You can crowdsource it or parse it automatically from some user's behavior online and some other sources. We personally at Toloka, of course, are the great advocates for the crowdsourcing because we are seeing its great effectiveness and flexibility, and we are sure that this is a great and powerful tool in many AI applications. But today, it would be great to hear different stories and different use cases from our dear experts about what are the approaches that they are following to collect the data. So I'm inviting our dear guest speakers. Each one of you would have like approximately 5 minutes to tell a little bit about your amazing product and share with us the story of how you have been dealing with the question of data in your cases. Let me invite Beth to be the first. Beth, do you hear us?
Yep, I do. And can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Great, wonderful. Well, I'm Beth White. I'm the founder, and I call myself often the chief bot at MebeBot, just because it's fun. And MebeBot is an AI intelligent assistant designed to automate answers to employee frequently asked questions. So we often call ourselves, we're like the Alexa for the workplace. So if you've ever worked in a company and you started a new job, or you've been an existing employee and you have questions like, how do I enroll in the 401k plan? Or how do I get a new insurance card? Or where are the instructions to using the VPN? Employees can ask MebeBot those types of questions and get answers back to their questions. So that's what we do, and we provide a solution that installs inside Microsoft Teams or Slack, as it works as a web chat, really helps open up the opportunity for employees to get 24/7 support, which we know now with everyone working remote and hybrid jobs, it's really critical and important for employees to have that support. And then the companies themselves, have the ability to control and edit the answers that the employees receive at any point in time. We also do push messaging and pulse surveys to continue to measure employee adoption and engagement. And with our dashboard, we've got a great dashboard that shows real-time usage analytics so that our customers can see exactly how many answers employees are receiving per day, from what geographic location. We support employees in over 30 countries right now, and we have over 11,000 employees utilizing our product. Talking about some case studies and to kind of drill into that, some of the companies you all might hear of in Austin, we have Epicor Software as a customer, E2Open, RetailMeNot, Abrigo. They're all fabulous customers of ours that are looking for ways to use AI and automation. And so when we look at, how our customers are using our solution, it is providing it to employees to get those quick answers to their questions and support their needs. But to get to that core data set, what we did that's probably a little bit more unique is that we took sort of an 80-20 rule. I spent 15 years in HR, so I understood this business problem. I had all these questions directed to me for years. And so I was able to, work with my team to create a web portal that our customers use that have a curated library of over 250 of the most commonly asked questions. Then we applied a lot of training data into that, ingested that data, exposed it to all of our customers who are all on multi-tenant architecture. And now their employees, every time they're asking questions, the crowdsourced approach is actually training the AI data model to be smarter and more accurate over time. And so by having this sort of a contained solution, I call it often a bot in a box because it's very easy to get up and running. Our customers can have 85 to 90% accuracy when they launch the solution. Many people think, oh, our employees are very unique and they're asking all different questions. Well, it's really not that unique. A lot of them are asking the same types of questions. So that's kind of the philosophy that we've gone with. And we just love being able to support what's now called the employee experience. How do we help employees onboard to companies faster, keep them engaged, help support them so that they can be using their focused time to do work that matters for the business.
Oh, thanks. That's super interesting. But what was like the first start when you just started? How did you obtain the first piece of data? Can you share with us that?
Yeah, I mean, well, the reality is many companies had created lots of different types of FAQs out there. I mean, you can actually, every public entity has an FAQ that's HR or IT oriented to support their employees. So we had ways to kind of ingest a little bit of that data to get things started. But by having more of a contained, knowledge base that we have, it allowed us to further define and really test and train the AI model. We apply human supervised learning as well. We're constantly looking at, the accuracy of the answers, and we give employees opportunities to provide a thumbs up or thumbs down on every question served to them or answer served to them so that we can continue to train that AI data model.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's actually something that we face so many times when every particular customer thinks that their use case is very unique, but then in the end you find out that there are lots of similarities which can help different customers all over their experience. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Sure.
That's very interesting. Dave, I would like to pass the microphone to you to share your story and listen how do you solve the questions of data in your startup.
Great. Yeah, Dave DiCaprio. I'm the founder and chief technology officer at ClosedLoop.ai. So Closed Loop is a healthcare data science platform. So we are actually helping different healthcare organizations, and that's health insurance companies or hospital systems or any of the many other organizations involved in healthcare. We provide tools to them to help them build and use AI and machine learning in their business. There's so many different areas that machine learning and AI can impact healthcare that we don't try to build all of those. We just try to build the tools that help our customers utilize that data better and build those kinds of models. And so very often we're helping our customers build models to do things like predict who is likely to end up in the emergency room or having a hospital visit, so you can proactively intervene before that person ends up having some bad outcome. If you really want to make a difference in the cost of healthcare, you have to figure out how to avoid people from ever showing up at the emergency room or the hospital at all. You can think about how to make it cheaper once they get there, but really the answer is once you're in the hospital, it's kind of too late at that point. And so making a difference in healthcare costs is about more proactive care and about intervening earlier in the process. And that's for a specific acute event or even in chronic disease, intervening earlier. And so by predicting the progression of disease or predicting these bad outcomes, we can help healthcare organizations be more proactively and get out to their members, their customers, their patients more quickly and more effectively. We have some natural challenges in data due to the fact that everything we do deals with protected health information. So every customer we have is controlled by HIPAA. And so
probably you're dealing with the hardest type of data one could imagine, really.
Yeah. And so it's interesting when you talked about those different areas in which, there's the hardware and the algorithms and the data. I think, one of the areas where we have particular expertise is not in amassing a huge amount of data, but understanding how to use that data effectively. And so a lot of our tools are around how to interpret medical records and interpret pharmacy claims or prescription records, all those kinds of things. An example of that is we can get all of somebody's raw prescription records and aggregate that up to know what medications are they on and how frequently are they taking them by looking at, the prescription refill dates that they have and how many pills were in each prescription. There's a bunch of logic there and you have to figure it all out. But there's a lot of processing that happens on top of the data before it can go into AI, especially in healthcare, because the data is very complicated. And so that's where we specialize. So we were able to sort of build a value proposition for our business, not based around we have a lot of data, but we understand your data and we can give you tools that make more use out of it. So to address your question, how did we get started?
Yeah.
You
The
know,
most
we were a
interesting part.
startup. We did what most people did, is we went around with the humble startup play and begged people to give us data. We said, we're smart people and we'll do work for free if you can, trust us enough. And we knew what we were doing on the security side. We got our first customers to sort of give us some data, and that allowed us to prove out the initial algorithms and the initial approach of what we were doing.
So probably the most difficult part was on the security side, right? To somehow obtain the data, which is
yeah, HIPAA. There's a lot with HIPAA to sort of be able to get to the point where you can work with protected health data. A lot of it, though, is really just doing a good job of everything. There's nothing magic about it. It's, if you read everything you're supposed to read and you do everything you're supposed to do and everything's encrypted and you make sure that passwords aren't spread around and nobody has access to anything, and you can document all that and prove it, then you can do it. So it is a bunch of work, but it's also, when you get in the habit of it, you feel like, well, this is really how all data should be protected, isn't it? Not just healthcare data. So
that's actually relieving to hear, because I guess many startup founders are really thrilled about the HIPAA thing, and like it's so scary even to approach this topic.
Yeah, there are definitely a bunch of things you have to know how to do, but it is possible. I will say one other quick thing, just because this is a crowdsourcing. I actually did an AI project, a side project on sports analytics annotation that was basically automated analysis of tennis videos. And that was an AI application I built sort of as a side project for myself. I built an annotation tool and ended up crowdsourcing the annotation for that. And that is actually turned into a really useful little platform. It's used by like 30 different Division I tennis programs in the US, and it's still based on crowdsourcing data. And so it was built long before any of these platforms existed.
That's cool. That's super interesting. Yeah, thank you so much.
That was the case where crowdsourcing really helped us get off the ground.
I would just remind that after this session, we are having the breakout session where we invite all the people to share their experience and some funky data sets they had ever to collect. I guess your tennis case can be also one of the pretenders. We are going from Toloka side. We're going to prize the winner or the author of the most funkiest data set with a cool merge of Toloka, powering AI, empowering people. So maybe you have good chances with your use case. Thank you so much. That's super interesting. I'm passing the microphone to Robert. Robert has a super interesting use case. I think it would be very interesting for everyone to hear more about that.
Thanks, Olga, and thanks, Toloka. My name's Robert Matney. Hello, I lead our strategic partnerships work at Yonder. With Yonder, just to set the frame, we work with publicly available information, open source data, and we help our customers understand and contextualize online culture and discourse. And we have a SaaS dashboard solution, that's hard to say, where we help brands and organizations strategically identify threats online, typically in the shape of, say, adversarial narratives or networks of agenda-driven adversarial accounts, but also identify opportunities, typically in the shape of intelligence about which audience are most responsive or most likely to be responsive to their brand messaging and are in alignment with their company values for sales or marketing support. And it's based on this, understanding that the internet has more power than ever to shift public opinion and change consumer behavior. And our driving why is that we feel that brands need more time to prepare for the unpredictable in order to protect brand value, brand reputation, and they'll also benefit from data to help them personalize content to stay connected with influential groups. And the how that we pursue is by mapping influential groups that reliably drive conversations online and that have the potential to damage reputation through boycotts, harassments, politicization, things like that. And then also to identify influential subcultures wherever they may be having discourse in the online space as a path to engagement and virality. So we track narratives and groups from sort of fringe groups with their narratives, how they might make a path through niche media to power users and then on into the mainstream. And it operates a little bit like an epidemiological analysis. And so we track those kinds of groups. And our goal then is to fill the social intelligence gap by covering platforms that aren't often covered in social listening platforms, and also to provide trajectory, both historical and to some degree predictive, based on that historical data set of what those factions do over time. Our data story is that we secure publicly available data at massive scale across a wide variety of social media platforms, inclusive, of course, of the mainstream platforms, but also alternative tech platforms. And we do leverage APIs wherever they're available. And then we use AI to find the influential users and groups wherever they are online, track the narratives that originate or are amplified by those groups, ideally before they go viral for our customers. And of course, the idea is to give those customers time to prepare or to seize the opportunity, if that's the side of the equation we're on. And most of our machine learning that we have implemented currently is unsupervised and built to detect patterns of similarity at scale in normalized but unlabeled data. So I can dig deeper into the faction detection and the narrative detection if that's of interest. So I will. So our tool focuses on finding patterns or similarities in that publicly available social media content that indicates emergent and durable narratives, as well as the detection of accounts that behave in highly similar and frequently agenda-driven ways over time. We refer to them as factions, and in so doing, in that similarity, they tend to exert disproportionate influence in online discourse, owing to how the platforms have their algorithms of content promotion functioning in space. And then once we have the factions and the narratives, we juxtapose those two and provide a fresh set of analytics around trajectory and where things are likely to go.
Oh, thank you so much. So do I understand correctly, like speaking about the first steps with the data when you just started, like your first steps were related to parsing the data online, right? Parsing some social media. And I know that you are able to parse some like not the most popular social networks, right? So
yeah, that's
very
right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's right, Olga. I mean, that was the initial lift is securing the data. So we have a data collections pipeline that's hitting against APIs, for example, with Twitter and Facebook. But then, of course, when we're looking to incorporate data like 4chan and 8chan, it's just a different kind of lift. And of course, it requires normalization. What are the analogs between those platforms? Sometimes they exist, sometimes they don't exist at all. But if we're going to derive meaningful patterns across platforms, we've got to find out wherever those analogs do exist.
Super, that's very interesting and very interesting application of the technology and very useful, I would say, for many companies. Let me share some of the use cases of the Toloka and then it would be great to discuss also your thoughts on the effectiveness of the crowdsourcing and some questions from our audience. Please don't hesitate to ask the questions. We would try to answer them together with our experts. Just give me 1 minute. I will share the screen to finalize. Okay, here I go. Yes, this is myself. Yeah, it's seen fine. Yes. Okay. So thank you so much, our dear experts. I would, if you don't mind, share a couple of use cases from the customers of Toloka, just to give our audience some additional ideas of how they can start with the data, start with their startup, having the first steps of initiating the initial data set. So imagine this is a real life use case. One of the founders had the business idea. He wanted to sell sneakers online via the online app without people having to try them on. The idea is very interesting and understandable, and we know that technology allows us to do that. But then comes the first initial question, okay, where do I get the data to train my model on? And the startup Needsy, they are the customers of Toloka platform. They came up with quite a brilliant idea. They said, okay, we would ask, using the crowdsourcing, we would ask thousands of people all over the world to take small short videos of their feet, quite similar to the case that Dave described with the tennis records. And actually it really worked. Using the Toloka application, they have collected more than 5,000 videos. It took us just several days because the crowd is really very large, and roughly speaking, at every moment of time, there are thousands of people available and thousands of people who were interested in actually participating in such quite a fun task, take a video of your feet. So what they did is they have collected around 5,000 short videos. Then they have divided those videos into the set of screenshots. They have removed the duplicate slides, and thus they have ended up with around 50,000 images, the data set, which they fed into the model to obtain like the model predicting the fit of the shoes for every customer of their app. And Toloka helped them to obtain all the needed data within literally less than several days, so that they could continue the work on their product further. And one other case is in a way also similar to what maybe Beth was describing. The Y Combinator-backed startup Handle is using crowdsourcing for the human-in-the-loop process. So what they are dealing with is actually the task of transcribing the handwritten text into the structurized digital form. This is quite an often case in many financial services or insurance reports and etc. There's lots of human work that needs to be somehow automated. And this startup has a very smart algorithm of automatically processing this data. But as the majority of the algorithms, and probably many of you know that, practically none of the algorithms work like perfectly in 100% of cases. Usually, as just Beth mentioned, there are like 80% of cases that would be processed automatically just fine. But then there would be 20 or 10% of edge cases, difficult cases where machines fail, but humans do better than machines. And what did these guys do is they actually built a human-in-the-loop pipeline where the majority of cases is processed automatically, but then the edge cases are sent to Toloka Crowd. And there, again, due to availability of large amounts of people, all 24 hours, 7 days a week, there are all the time people ready to catch these tasks. So within 6 to 8 minutes, the difficult cases from the documents were transcribed by human. And that allowed this company to actually set up the pipeline, which processes more than 4,000 documents every day. And comparing to the in-house solution that of labeling solution that they have been using before, it allowed them to reduce 2 times the time for processing the documents and actually increase multiple times the whole throughput of their process and of their system. So why we are actually strong believers in the crowdsourcing? I'm personally working in this topic for more than 10 years already, and I'm really passionate about the technology and actually the whole concept of obtaining the wisdom of the collective experience of thousands or even millions of people. And managing their minor efforts to obtain useful signals and useful results that can be later applied to feed the technology. So why do we believe so much in that technology? First of all, there's such a large variety of use cases where you can use crowdsourcing. We've been speaking about the AI applications, but there are also many others, like, for example, you probably can see the logo of Toloka. And how did we choose the particular logo? Our designers came with several options and different variants of the design, and we used the public vote my friends are helping me to show the logo on my t-shirt. So what we did is actually we used the public vote on Toloka to understand which of the design is admired more by the crowd. Sometimes, especially the further we move from the online to offline, crowdsourcing is literally the only way to collect some data. If there's something not happening in the online world, the only way to obtain the data is literally to ask people to collect it from the offline. Also, as I have mentioned, the algorithms are never perfect. So the crowdsourcing is having large amounts of people available at every moment of time allow you to build real-time human-in-the-loop processes. And what is important for me personally, I would say, is that when crowdsourcing is organized in an ethical way, it is also a source that can bring significant social impact to both people who participate in the process of the crowdsourcing, because it gives flexible and interesting source of additional income for those who are in need of that. But at the same time, it allows to improve like the local environment. For example, we are right now running a very interesting project in Barcelona where we use the feet on street crowdsourcing. Like, people are asked to go by feet to a certain location and verify whether the business or the organization has a good access for disabled people. And again, this is quite often this is the only way to obtain this information for large amounts of the territories. And that's why we believe in the crowdsourcing so much. And throughout the history of Toloka, we are observing the growth of demand for the crowdsourcing correlated with the global rising of the AI market. And that helped us grow throughout several years to become, I would say, one of the largest crowdsourcing platforms in the world. We cover more than 100 countries and all the major languages, with more than 200,000 people active every month. So what's next? Right now, I would like we have some more time to discuss with our precious experts some questions regarding the crowdsourcing. And there was a question about how to effectively store the data. But before that, I would just remind our audience, once again, please don't hesitate to follow the QR code and the link to get the promo code for free trying of Toloka. And for those of you who want to dig deeper into the question of crowdsourcing data collection, we are happy to offer the grant to the startups. So please don't hesitate to apply. I would remind once again that in like 10 minutes, we would be having a breakout session and discussion, telling funky stories about different data sets and choosing the winners who would get the merch of Toloka during our happy hour. And at 2:30, there would be a live workshop demo where we would show how actually, like, what are the particular steps you need to do in the tool in order to launch your data collection project for your AI startup. Thank you so much. I'm now stopping to share my screen, and let's come back to the questions. So the question number one was, any recommendations on the way for storing the data? Is it public cloud or some other ways? Maybe some of our experts would want to share your experience. Dave, maybe you have something?
Yeah. So, certainly the public cloud is the default place for pretty much everything nowadays. It's, especially for a startup, I think, we have made the commitment to be just cloud-based. We don't offer anything on premise. And we sell into healthcare, which is one of the, they're a laggard in most of this stuff, in most of these areas. But even the healthcare organizations that today are still not on the cloud, they at least apologize for it and have a plan to get to the cloud. So I think, that's probably the way to go.
Thank you. Robert, maybe you can something to add, or the same?
Fully ditto. We have a secure implementation of cloud storage.
Okay, Beth, what about you?
Yeah, cloud storage as well. And it's just, being mindful of the data that you're actually storing. We just ingest a lot of data and purge it out. So aggregate a lot of the results and ensure more privacy and security for our customers.
Yeah, I would vote for public cloud as well. In Toloka, we also store the data at Microsoft Azure. So all the customers are able to use that infrastructure. So there's a very interesting question number 2. What processes and policies do you have in place to ensure the data powering your AI isn't causing harms or creating inequitable outcomes? Very interesting questions. I don't know, Robert, do you have anything to answer that?
Sure. I mean, at the heart, our data is publicly available data that is people voluntarily revealing their own thoughts and perspectives. So that insulates us from some of the categories of concern that are raised by this question. Another policy for us is that though we algorithmically detect highly similar behaviors of accounts, we do have a human in the loop process to then kind of title and describe, to attribute it in a way that is in alignment with how those groups are articulating themselves. And so we want to render that power back to the people in terms of who's participating or the accounts that are participating. And I mean, I think, the price of getting the right answer to this question is just kind of continual diligence. So we just have a review process in place for our algorithms, and you just have to keep the discipline of reviewing your algorithms and keeping a soft focus on the full business question, and just engage with the most challenging questions as often as you can, which I hope doesn't sound like an evasion. It is really just about continual diligence and discipline. And
that's actually, I'm happy to hear that, because this is one of the things that I'm a little bit worried sometimes about the startup industry, is that is there a discipline to constantly monitor how your model is working once you have deployed it into the production? Dave, do you have something to add here?
Yeah. A couple of things. One is monitoring is extremely important. We have a feature drift component that is part of our platform that helps you see if any of your input data looks different than it used to. Obviously, we're in healthcare, and so March of 2020, everything looked different, and it was a pretty big deal to figure out what models in healthcare still mattered last year and what didn't. And if you were trying to look at predict who is going to go to the doctor. All of that information changed. So we had a very striking example of, massive changes, and it's really important to think about that because you can make some bad decisions otherwise. So, monitoring is ongoing monitoring is incredibly important.
You have just overcome this really huge drift in the context in March 2020.
I don't know how many times I've looked at a graph and been like, what went on there? What was that like? Oh, that was March of 2020. Okay, I know what happened right there. It was just, like every model, every single graph you look at of healthcare over time.
That's interesting, by the way. And Beth, what about you, by the way? Did like the whole COVID situation affect like your context and your models?
We are a B2B solution, and the answers that are produced and returned to the employee are driven by the business themselves. But what COVID did is we created a lot of new content that our customers could utilize. I mean, we have a whole, I hate to say it, COVID pack of content, in our curated knowledge base around, do I have to wear a mask at work? Do I need to present a vaccine card? So we've had to adapt like everyone else to supporting remote work, hybrid work, return to work scenarios. As far as just ensuring, the data, and I've been part of presentations. We sell to HR and IT teams with inside businesses, and there's a lot of scrutiny on, AI data models when it comes to discrimination, biases in the data sets, because again, we have a kind of a contained scenario of content. There's, the HR people get to write the content that's then delivered to the employee. So we help eliminate a little bit of that. It's not as open as some of the scenarios where there's technology out there, screening resumes, for example, and using certain, algorithms to determine, which candidates, float to the top, and the opportunity there, frankly, is for a lot of bias, in that scenario. So we're a little bit unique in that we have a discrete set of customers and their employees in a B2B scenario with a controlled knowledge base. But, it is an ever-changing world, and we provide, a human supervised or human in the loop, learning to everything we do as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I would add from the experience of Toloka, actually, when we speak about the supervised learning, which is like the Toloka is a tool for, I think that it is crucially important to have the access to the large variety of different people with different background to make sure that there are no specific biases in the data that are collecting with the help of the human. And that is why we pay lots of attention to our global coverage and many tools and instruments for smart targeting different tasks to different audiences. Okay, thank you so much. Actually, that was a super interesting session. If any of our experts would like to say something for the closing part for a couple of minutes. What do you think about the era of data in AI? Do you think it is like the last and the main question right now, or what do you think about that?
And there's a lot of big topics.
I think the issue of bias and fairness is incredibly important. These tools. First, I think it's important to separate bias and fairness. We look at these as independent issues. Bias, we look at as, does your model perform equally well on various subgroups? And that's more of a technical question, and you can make sure a model performs or not. Fairness has to do with how a model is employed and the decisions it's making, making it, and whether you are allocating resources in an equitable way. And that is not something that can be solved technically. And so I think it's very important to understand that from an AI perspective, the technology plays a role in bias and fairness, but also just traditional ethics and understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, and does the model achieve that. The same model can be used in very fair ways and in very unfair ways. depending on the decision and depending on whether you're providing, are you denying a loan to somebody, or are you trying to target people for additional outreach for more education? The same model might be very appropriate for one of those and actually illegal to use in the other one.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a very interesting topic. Hopefully the next Austin Startup Week, we will devote to deeper dive into this topic. Thank you all very much. It was great discussion. Navira, I think I'm passing the microphone to you.
Yes, thank you so much, all of you. I've learned so much, and I think we had such an amazing variety of startups speaking today. We learned from Robert over at Yonder how they use crowdsourcing, or not crowdsourcing, but they use a public domain to build their data sets, right? So, Yonder is mapping influential groups and subcultures to uncover discourse and track those narratives, right? And understand what social media is saying to build that social intelligence. And then we move on to Beth from MeBeBot, who has really a niche area where she is pulling information and using her own personal experience. And as Beth eloquently said, you only need to solve like 80% of those questions, or be prepared to answer 80% to cover most of your use cases. And then we heard from Dave at Closed Loop AI, where you can't really necessarily go to the internet to gather your data and use crowdsourcing. He really needed to think outside the box and just directly ask his partners and customers for that data. So loved how we have such a wide variety of ways of how startups are managing their data sets. And then from Toloka, of course, we heard about they're helping startups solve their needs by going straight to the crowds to help startups get their hands on their data sets. So thank you so much for that amazing presentation. We're going to hop into our Q&A portion. So we'll be seeing you at the Q&A session.
And I'm sorry, I would like to also invite everyone for our session and contest on the top funkiest data sets, for which we are going to present our merge just right now in the breakout session.
Hey, Marianne, is there a way to...
Perfect. All right, so we are in the Q&A portion. I have a startup question for those of you in this room. Or can you all hear me or see me? Right. So I guess my question is, how do you think about packaging your data to drive additional revenue streams? So this question was sparked a little bit from Beth, who had mentioned she's able to see all of the questions people ask across a wide spectrum of customers. Same thing with Robert and Dave. You have insights on how one customer's data set's performing. Do you ever think about finding a way to package these data sets that you've collected and drive, create new revenue streams that are in addition to your core business model? Just curious.
Well, yeah, I'll weigh in a little bit. So, our core offering is typically for a comms organization or a PR and crisis agency. But we do know that there might be a broader use case for adding additional context to the data that you get from your social listening platform that might play out at a wider level to a wider set of stakeholders. So we're investigating what a data analytic API or data pipeline might look like that might feed into some of the other standard social listening platforms to add an additional kind of Yonder context. So we're investigating how that might operate. So that's one example of looking for ways to use the core data we have, the fundamental data analytics and mission that we have, but through a different delivery vehicle that may speak to a different use case.
Thank you.
It's a very interesting question you ask, and I think for us it's kind of an interesting piece of startup evolution. We thought about that a lot at the beginning. How do we take all this data and amass it together? What we learned pretty early on was that all the healthcare, because healthcare data is so difficult to get, all the healthcare organizations we deal with value it incredibly highly. And so they are not very excited about working with a small startup company that's going to take their data and monetize it. And so, and we really felt after talking to a bunch of organizations that were very worried about anything like that in our business plan. We decided that many of these organizations were probably overvaluing their data. They think they have some gold mine, but the reality is their gold mine is only useful when combined with everybody else's gold mine. And until they realize that, it's a difficult proposition. So we actually went the other direction and sort of had made it very explicit to all of our current customers that we are not monetizing your data. We give up all rights to monetize their data and basically say, we are here to help you build tools to extract as much as you can out of your data. And it was one of these things that was important for us as developing as a startup to think about our strategy around that, because if we had a plan to monetize this data, it would be much more difficult to sell the rest of our platform. And so we had to sort of make that business decision early on. It's proven to work out well for us so far. But it's definitely an important thing everybody should think about. And even if you sort of don't go down that direction, it should probably be explicit like it was with us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session, the crowdsourcing revolution and how future AI solutions will be built. When there is a specific need and creativity and skills in the right place, it's amazing what ideas and solutions can come from crowdsourcing. So platforms like Top Coder in software engineering and Kickstarter in the entrepreneurship space are leading to crowd-developed solutions. Now, Zeek by Studio X is doing the same for the energy industry. Join this fireside chat to hear how you can get rewarded in this model and how it can play a bigger role in developing AI solutions for the future. So in this session, you're going to learn how to get rewarded in a crowdsourcing model and how it can play a bigger role in developing AI solutions. Here are some tips on how to be successful, whether it's your first or your 30th competition, and discuss why Zeek is different from the competitors in the platform. I hope I pronounced that correctly, so apologize in advance. Let's bring our speakers on. Jessica Noglos, the program director at Zeek, and we also have Paul Genberg, the CEO and head of product at Studio X. So welcome and take it away.
Thank you so much, Navira, for the intro. I'm really happy to have you guys here. We'll start off by a little intro of each of us and then about Studio X and Zeek, and then we'll jump into the topic at hand. So I'm Paul Genberg, as Navira said, CEO of Studio X, as well as head of product. My background is actually in design, first widgets, a bunch of different products along the way, and I slowly veered more towards digital and innovation. And most recently now at Studio X, where I have the honor to work with Jessica.
Yes, hello, I'm Jessica Noglos. As Paul mentioned, I now run Zeek, which is one of the Studio X offerings. I think we'll go into a lot more detail about what Studio X is and what Zeek is. My background is actually in mechanical engineering, though I've also worked as a PM and a software engineer at different points in my career before making it more into the strategy world. And now running the Zeek program with Studio X. So back to you, Paul.
Thank you. So what is Studio X? Our mission is to reimagine the future of work in exploration. And really what that means is, to us, is this idea that, and in the news, it's quite current, but we really want to take the opportunity to bring a technology lens to innovation in the energy space. And Studio X is a mechanism, an avenue for us to create new products, new services, ultimately new businesses that help solve some of the toughest challenges that the energy industry more broadly has, and that's where Zeek comes in. In addition to Studio X, we want to change the way we work, right? And that's where crowdsourcing comes in. That's where open innovation comes in. We believe that there are different ways to generate new ideas, to generate new value for society, but for businesses at the same time, as well as for participants. And so the goal with every one of the products and services that we put out into the market is to involve an ecosystem, a community of participants across the board. And so that's a sort of a through line for anything that we put out into the world. Jess, do you want to intro a little bit about Zeek?
Yeah, sure. So Studio X exists as sort of a parent brand. We have 3 startups underneath the Studio X purview. One of them is called XCover, which is where we enable remote work on exploration or other energy projects. So such that anyone from anywhere in the world can work on a project and not be bound to an office in the energy industry, typically an office in Texas. The second is Six Lab. Six Lab is our startup accelerator, startup incubator. It's a bit of a blend of the both, where we bring in entrepreneurs and startups in the energy space, provide them with resources, support, and tools to grow their business, and then we help those businesses scale. And then Zeek, which is what I run, and which we'll be talking about in great detail, that's our crowdsourcing initiative. So what we do there is we take problems that we identify within the energy workflows, day-to-day issues folks face. We structure those into challenges, put data behind them, so whatever data sets we have available to release behind those, and we release those as challenges to our open community, which is about 2,000 strong, data scientists, geoscientists, software engineers, et cetera, who then compete on those challenges and build solutions that we then take and build on top of and then release as tools. We've been at it for about 2 years. We've launched over 11 challenges with hundreds of thousands of dollars of prizes behind them. That's been a really exciting journey.
Thank you. So today we're talking about the crowdsourcing revolution. This is a long time coming. It started a long time ago, but we want to bring in a little bit of a closer AI lens to it. And the way we're going to structure this is we're going to talk a little bit about the history, and just to ground ourselves, because people have slightly different definitions of what crowdsourcing is, and that's part of the fun, right? Is we have different perspectives. So we'll dig into that a little bit. Then we'll talk into what's happening today and take a little bit of a speculative lens at the end for where we think the future might be. And this is where we get pretty uncertain. Obviously, we'll give you our opinions, and then that leads into the very end, which is our Q&A, and we'd gladly take questions and sort of promote a conversation with you guys. So I took the liberty of taking the definition of crowdsourcing from Wikipedia, which is a very great example of knowledge crowdsourcing. And it says that crowdsourcing is a sourcing model in which individuals or organizations obtain goods or services, including ideas, voting, micro tasks, and finances from a large, relatively open, and often rapidly evolving group of participants. Now, Jess, given that definition, and it's pretty broad at that, how does that reflect your own perspective and your own experience with crowdsourcing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty solid definition. I think crowdsourcing exists on sort of any number of different angles. There's, the looking for ideas or solutions, which is the world Zeek exists in. There's also, other ways to leverage the crowd. Funding is a great example. Kickstarter's very famous for making that model work in other regards. And I think crowdsourcing, and it's called out in this definition, but maybe not as explicitly as we would, can be used to scale really small, simple level tasks, like something you'd see on Mechanical Turk, where you just want rapid answers to a simple problem or a small scale problem, all the way to really, really big examples. So you look at DARPA and X Prize and some of these $1 million plus challenges where they're enticing people to come in, bring in their ideas from a diversity of backgrounds and apply it into the problem. Zeek exists somewhere in the middle. We're not, looking for DARPA grand challenge level solutions, but we are looking for things that we can actually take ideas, unique ideas, creative ideas, things that wouldn't otherwise exist in the space we're in, take those and bring them into an organization, rather than investing in huge internal R&D efforts.
Got it. So you brought in a few examples of crowdsourcing or crowdfunding along the way, and I'm curious to get a little bit delving into that a little deeper in terms of your perspective on the pros and cons of some of them. And the first one I'd like to kind of that you brought up, which was sort of this idea of ideas and well, actually the first one, which was creative tasks. So using Mechanical Turk. Help me understand like how that helps, and if you can, so the pros and cons, but if you can start to apply a bit of that AI lens and how that aspect of crowdsourcing might actually help in the AI space.
Yeah, sure. So on Zeek, we typically are more AI focused. Not always. We've done some other challenges more around visualization, data collection, things of that nature. But when we're AI focused, there are platforms that are doing similar work. So Mechanical Turk isn't typically used for true AI work, but it's often used for labeling data and things of that nature, because it's meant to be very quick, small tasks that you just want to push out to a crowd and get done quickly. The most sort of comparable, usually the first comparison we get when we talk about Zeek to other people, is Kaggle. Kaggle is the Google-owned AI challenge startup. And so the couple pros, cons with that model, and I can talk a little bit about how we've worked slightly differently to kind of hedge against some of those cons. Kaggle launches data science challenges just like Zeek across a wide variety of topics. Kaggle has a huge user base. It's like 2 million plus people. But what that ends up creating is an environment where the challenges seem somewhat unfair. We've talked to probably hundreds of Kaggle competitors at this point in time, and there's a real perception that the folks that win are not actually individuals, but massive teams of researchers who are throwing everything they have at a problem to compete for the 4th and 5th and 6th decimal place. What we've done on Zeek to try to work against that is that we don't just assess these solutions based on that decimal point race. And additionally, we're more focused on specific disciplines, which brings in kind of more expertise that has that domain specificity to work on these problems. By adding other things into the way we evaluate, such as how long things take to run, if they're creative, if they're well documented, things of that nature, other than just pure performance, we end up with stuff that's a lot easier to take out of a challenge setting and push back into the real business world, which is a big issue you see in a lot of the things I mentioned, a lot of different crowdsourcing efforts, is you can end up with a whole bunch of ideas, a whole bunch of solutions, but it's very hard to assess which ones are good. And then it's very hard to take those things and actually push them into a usable business setting. And so that's been a big focus on our end as well.
Got it. So bring back to Kaggle. You mentioned that there's a level of or a perception of maybe unfairness, whether it's right or wrong. I don't want us to speculate on that. But one thing you mentioned is there's this perception that maybe the best teams are the best individual might actually not be individuals. They might actually be teams. Help me understand why, from a community perspective, that whether that's bad or good. I'm curious to understand better.
Yeah, and that was perhaps, I mean, it's not, the bad thing isn't that it's teams. The bad thing is that it's people sort of because there's such huge prizes on up for grabs, and it's such a huge community, you end up with sort of perverse incentives to get the absolute best performance, even if that means you're making a way more complicated model than is actually done in real life. We're very supportive of teams on Zeek. I think one thing we strive to even get better at Zeek is enabling that collaborative problem solving within the crowdsourcing space. Because when you do pure competitions, you kind of have to step away from encouraging that collaboration, which is something we're really excited about. So teams can participate, and we're constantly looking for new ways to make our model more collaborative, and that folks do feel comfortable sharing out what they've done without worrying that it's going to hurt their standings in the leaderboard. One place you see this work really well that I would say is another method of crowdsourcing is the open source world. They do a phenomenal job of encouraging and creating the incentive structure so that everyone's contributing to the same goal. And that's a type of challenge or crowdsourced endeavor that we're trying to figure out how we do as a business as well. And so we've talked, and we haven't implemented any of this, but talked about structuring, some sort of future challenge structure where you're compensated based on what you contribute to the overall bucket of work, as opposed to just the winners are getting involved. Because that one person could come in and look at the work and find that sort of one magic little thing that could be added to it that could take these solutions from, like 90% to the miracle 100% solution. And so we're constantly thinking about how we kind of embrace that open source mentality within the challenge dynamic we're running.
So one of the things, and we'll get to it a little later as well, but one thing you mentioned is business value and how to take, and you alluded sort of like how what Zeek is trying to do is convert sort of the ideas from individuals or teams and bring that back to something that drives, business economic value. Can you tell me about a little bit about how you see that in, broadly speaking, in the crowdsourcing space, and where these things work and where they might fall down a little bit or fall flat?
Yeah, definitely. And that I think is probably, there's sort of three buckets of things that are really challenging on crowdsourcing. I'd say the first is getting the data and the information and structuring that information. You need to like make a challenge so that you're going out to the group of people with enough detail that they understand what you're looking for. I'd say that's challenge pool one. Challenge pool two, and I already said this, is determining what is good and doing that in an efficient and not time-consuming way. And then challenge three really is taking the output of any crowdsourcing initiative and translating it back into your business such that it has business impact. The way we think about that on Zeek, we've structured, basically when you submit into our challenges, we have a very, very flexible IP policy that says, hey, we get to use this and do with it what we wish, but you as the contestant also can do with it as you wish. So we've had contestants end up writing journal and articles about their work, open sourcing portions of their work, et cetera. In the meantime, we take this and currently we see it as almost inspiration. So we'll take the work that's been done and we throw it to our own internal team who poke at it, add to it, tweak it, et cetera, to get it into a usable state where we feel comfortable deploying it as a business-facing tool. I think this sort of jump in taking something that comes out of a crowdsourcing effort and translating it into a real-world business objective requires a lot of thought in advance, because the more you can do in that specification phase to say, hey, we know what we want, we know where we want it to hook into, and we know what success looks like, designing that into the criteria of what you're looking at goes a long way in easing that transition later on. I think second, I talked a bit about RIP policy. Being very intentional about that in your upfront process is crucial. And being flexible is crucial as well. Folks do not want to participate in competitions where they're signing everything away, giving everything away, obviously, unless the financial stakes justify that. But you really have to think intentionally and work with the community to design that incentive structure that works. But both of those things make it easy, much easier later on, to both feed something into your organization and to, ensure you're above board legally and sort of within the bounds of that IP policy as well.
So aside from Zeek, have you participated or contributed to any sort of crowdsource, and I'm using the term very broadly, effort?
Sure. I think, I've funded a few Kickstarters, which I would put into the crowdfunding bucket. In college did a couple of student competitions, which isn't, a bit of the focus within Zeek is students, but we're open to everyone. And actually most of the time our winners are not college students. But I think, as a college student participating in the things I participated with, money wasn't really the core objective. And I think that's something we see across the Zeek community as well, is that, the prize is nice, but the opportunity to learn something new, get recognition, work with a new group of people, et cetera, is also a huge pull here. How about you, Paul? I think you've done some.
Yeah, I've over time I've funded a few Kickstarters and Indiegogos. Sometimes I got something back. Sometimes that money was gone. So that's a little bit of the risk, I guess, in that model. But more closely to crowdsourcing, I was involved early days when I was sort of more of an industrial designer and did design products in a platform named Corky. Mm-hmm. And it's about a decade plus ago. And essentially they leveraged a community of inventors to source ideas, and then the community to help shape what that idea eventually would become, from all the way from the form factor of the idea, this product, to the branding, the messaging, and ultimately it fed its own success in that you had a captive audience of people that bought the product, and as and for a time I would get a check, which was really awesome because they had a point system around how your contribution, which is kind of similar to what you mentioned, is in the future is how do you reward people for their contribution, not just the sort of the outcome, and sort of the activity. And that's the holy grail of any sort of community, is to have a thriving community, an active community. So yes, that's my experience, for better or for worse. Looking a little bit back into the past, crowdsourcing, like I said at the top, it has been around for a long time, and until the early 2000s, it wasn't called crowdsourcing. I forget who coined it, but I think as early as the 18th century, the British government put out a call for the best way to measure longitudes, and they had a $20,000 reward, or not dollars, pounds. Sorry about that. I think that another one that's actually has been made into a movie called The Professor and the Madman is the Oxford Dictionary actually ended up crowdsourcing the definition of terms and words over a number of years to create what is the first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, which I thought was. And then you have more recent ones with Netflix, the $1 million prize, DARPA X Prize. You mentioned those. So from that historical perspective, what can we learn from those early efforts, those more recent, and even some of the more recent efforts?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the learnings will tie back to some of the things I already said, but I think a lot's to be learned. I think DARPA and X Prize and the Netflix example you gave is, when you really want participation and eyes on a problem, those are all challenges that had, very substantial prizes behind them, which seems like a huge spend when you look at it just at the surface level. But I think when you compare it to what the cost to do that sort of work and have that many ideas done internally, both how expensive that would be and how time consuming that would be, it kind of makes more sense. Like, oh yeah, I think this is worth $1 million if we're generating so many very interesting, very thorough ideas. I think some of those examples point to hiccups. So the Netflix challenge is an example. They offered $1 million for a new algorithm for how they were delivering recommended content. The all-time winner, that solution was never actually put into production because the complexity within that solution would have required massive infrastructure overhaul, and it wasn't worth the effort of it. And so that was the kind of thing where the more you can think up front about what success looks like beyond just performance, when you're talking about AI solutions, is very important, because it's not just, an algorithm that's 99% good, but takes, months to train and hours to generate a single inference, is going to be a lot less valuable to you at the end of the day in most cases than the algorithms that's 90% accurate, but way faster. And so defining that early on would have, they ended up using, I think, the third place solution pretty heavily, but defining that early on could have saved some of that pain and suffering, and probably would have made their judging process much simpler. I'm trying to remember of other examples you gave. I think another interesting historical example that points to some learnings that have come out of it were that BP did a call out after the Deepwater Horizon spill. They called for ideas of how to do the oil cleanup, and that yielded thousands and thousands of submissions. But the work to go through that and assess what is good, because there was no definitive criteria assigned, ended up being more time consuming than probably if they had an internal team really generate those ideas. And so it really comes down to how can you structure this thing in a way that makes sense? And then once you have the submissions, are you optimizing for how quickly and how effectively you can decide what is good and what is not good, such that it actually becomes impactful to your business and not a huge time suck and money suck.
That's so if I were to summarize just that, or at least in my own thinking, part of that is adopting almost a Pareto principle, right? 80-20.
Yep.
Is that what you were referring to a little bit?
I'd say so. That you want to get the models that are going to actually be effective, and the more you design that up front, the better. That makes sense.
And one of the things you mentioned this a couple times is this idea of spending the time on the upfront on really, and the way I kind of internalize it is really clearly defining the problem statement is one thing, and then I think the other is sort of the acceptance criteria, for lack of a better term, or sort of defining at least some variables or some guardrails around expected or desired outcome. Can you expand on that a little bit, on like
Sure.
and how, and perhaps on how you're trying to implement that at Zeek as well?
Sure. So on the acceptance criteria piece, I think we found it's most helpful for there to be both, for AI challenges, I should clarify, but probably most challenges other than AI, both there to be qualitative and quantitative metrics on which you're assessing submissions. So quantitative metrics are very, very helpful because you can often build sort of an automated screener for how things are performing against each other. The way we do that on Zeek is for the first 90% of the challenge, you're just submitting CSV predictions that your model is generating. And then our system, our platform, is comparing those to a known truth and giving you a score. That lets contestants get an idea of how they're doing relative to others, at least on the performance metric. And it lets us sort of get an understanding of where folks are ranking, whose models we should dig into further, et cetera. Once we have that sort of initial performance screening, a couple things become really important, and this is where we get into qualitative. So first, we then take those models and we need to verify those. The unfortunate reality of particularly AI challenges is that often there's ways to sort of work around the rules. Some might call it cheating. Some would say it's creative solutioning. But it's very important to verify the results that you see on the leaderboard. There's been a few very well covered Kaggle incidents where folks scraped data, found the data set online, things of that nature, and had built models that were not actually solving the problem, but were leveraging cheating strategies. So that verification is very important. Second, we found that looking at a number of qualitative metrics is very important, and this will always tie into what your end goal is for this model. So typically what we want is something that's, when put into production, easy to work with. And by easy, I mean quick to work with. So rather than taking forever to train and forever to generate an inference, we typically have sort of times we're looking at. So we'll put a timing speed requirement on solutions, score them based off that. Documentation is huge. If you're taking a model and putting it into a production environment, you need to understand how it works so that you can tweak it, change it, modify it as needed. So requiring contestants to really put effort into the documentation and into providing a requirements file so we can run it, things of that nature, super important. And then often, one of the big pros of crowdsourcing is that you get a lot of different solutions that come from different schools of thought, different backgrounds, et cetera. The creativity can be very important here. And so we've started putting some assessment in many cases behind the creativity of a particular solution. And that's tricky because that's very qualitative, but the way we've handled the qualitative nature of that is we'll typically have a judging panel of folks of different multidisciplinary backgrounds. We'll typically have our designer taking a look, a data scientist, a subject matter expert in whatever the geoscience field we're looking at is, other folks, depending on what we're doing. And then each of them will assess the creativity independently so that we can take a blended score, which we found is sort of the most fair way to assess something that is very sort of inherently qualitative.
Got it. Well, thank you for delving into a little bit the details of how we're attempting to bring some clarity to the madness sometimes. Jumping forward a little bit, today we see a lot more companies engaging into some form of crowdsourcing, whether it's even engaging into crowd voting, crowd tasks, funding even. I'm curious, and then if you think about the history of these companies, a lot of the large ones in any case oftentimes had R&D departments where, and the famous ones are Xerox Spark. IBM has a phenomenal R&D department, among others, right? Google X and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I'm curious, where, if you think about that and where crowdsourcing is going, how do those two modes actually coexist, one being more proprietary in nature versus one being much more open, much more collaborative and transparent in nature?
Sure. And I mean, I would say I think there's space for both within a vast majority of companies. And I would say most companies should probably exist somewhere on a scale in between where initiatives, things that you need to hold really close to chest, things that are very, very valuable IP or very core to the business or depend on data that absolutely cannot be released or discussed. That's the kind of thing that I think will always warrant internal R&D efforts. Even at Studio X, we are huge advocates of open innovation and crowdsourcing, but we still have some things we have our internal team handle within the research realm. That said, I do think historically, and particularly the energy companies we work with, have been much too aggressive in what they hold close to chest and much too siloed in the way they approach innovation. And I think that's probably true across a wide range of industries that have been reluctant to open up. But what we've seen in the time we've been working on Zeek is a lot of these problems, when we do open them up, they yield pretty incredible results. So we had a challenge we ran in June 2020 called Go with the Flow. Pretty open. We wanted contestants to develop a flow-based model of how you might see fluids move through a seismic layer. A relatively simple ask, but it got a bunch of submissions, and the top three, when we showed them to the teams we work with within the energy space, were so excited by the solution. They have tools that do similar things, but they're very old, very outdated. No one's really taken a fresh approach to this problem. And so we were able to really kind of inject energy into this by bringing this problem into the open space. I think we've seen some other really exciting examples around that front. And so we're building that momentum. And I'd imagine sort of that attitude of opening things up could benefit a lot of other industries as well.
Now, one of the things you hit on a little bit, and this has to do with just code development in general, but also thinking of the world of AI and how that's working and building out a model and essentially putting your ideas out on paper. How do you think companies should, if they want to derive business value, and you talked a bit about how Zeek handles it, but how should others think about it more broadly? How do they engage? How do they build a community? How do they build a community if they want to do so themselves? What are your learnings and what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, great question. I think, there's a number of ways to approach it. We've started to see some outreach to Zeek to host challenges through our platform, given that we have the community. I think you see other folks, there's any number of platforms you could leverage for that. Kaggle, Unearthed is one that exists in sort of the mining space. There's a lot of niche platforms and more general platforms. But I think when you think about it, the place to start, I really think, is by going to the folks directly. That would be your sort of ideal participants in whatever you're trying to do. So I think in many cases, when crowdsourcing is on the table, it's because you're looking for individuals with expertise that does not exist directly within your own organization. So I think a good starting point for anyone is to identify some of those individuals, go out into the wild and talk to them, conduct ethnography, understand what their motivations are to participate in something like this, understand what they'd be looking for in terms of compensation, timing, what sort of inputs and outputs would be best for them, and start to figure out what you'd need to do from a platform perspective. I think much like building any product, doing MVP tests of this are really, really helpful and important. We did a couple small challenges at some universities just to kind of better understand the dynamics of running these competitions and where pitfalls might exist on a smaller scale than something that's launched to the entire public. And then from there, it's really just, getting the right eyes on this thing, much like any product. For us, it's been very helpful. Traditional marketing has been very helpful. I think finding the sort of niche communities that already exist and catering to them has been very helpful. For us, that's the community of data scientists that have geoscience backgrounds, which is a small but very active group we've been able to leverage. And then, continuing to talk to that community throughout and be sure you're continuing to build the product in the direction that they'd want to see it go.
Got it. So moving into sort of the last frame, which is, looking at the future. crowdsourcing, as we know it, and sort of the modern incarnation of crowdsourcing, really was powered by the Web 2.0, right? Interactive sites, building communities, and so forth. With Web 3, right? And I'm going to see the B word, blockchain, smart contracts, and the sort of the promises of what Web 3 comes in, which is, you know, a lot of more control of your data, a lot more control of your ideas, some openness, but also a lot more privacy. How is that, you know, thinking about that and thinking about what you're doing now with Zeek, how do you foresee the crowdsourcing sort of community and effort evolving into that space?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where you'll start to see more of an alignment between like what the open source community achieves versus what, you know, business crowdsourcing attempts to do. The sort of friction point that exists in the middle there is, how do you, like, when you're taking crowdsourced work and leveraging it for business output and presumably for revenue, how do you make that a more fair relationship? The open source world is obviously in some cases compensated, but typically it's people working on these things because they'd like to. And I think this idea of smart contracts, blockchain, fuzzy, I know, but creates at least one framework where you can start to really align those incentives and ensure that, with Zeek as an example, if we're taking something that's a challenge output, we're building it into a tool that's going to, you know, hopefully do really well for our business. How can we share that back to the folks that contributed to this tool, other than just this one-time payment for them winning the challenge? So I think you can get into some really compelling future models of royalty-based payments, things of that nature, kind of how the Apple App Store model works or the Android App Store model works, but on a more real-time basis as things are being used. I think it's an exciting future for crowdsourcing, I'd say.
Awesome. We do have a question that came in that I think is really interesting, is actually on the front end. How do you come up with the topics for the challenges that we have at Zeek?
Yeah, definitely. And this can be, I mentioned, this is sort of one of the challenging buckets, because what we do is we look for gaps in existing workflows. And that often means we'll pick a team or an individual or a certain discipline, spend a day with them, kind of look at the tools they use, look at what they're doing, and see things that maybe don't make sense. Sometimes people can identify these things themselves. Oftentimes they kind of don't. It's hard for us to recognize the inefficiencies in our own work unless you're kind of looking at it with new eyes. A good example of this is I'm trying to think of one that I didn't already give. So within geoscience, for example, there's a lot of reformatting of data. So you want to move things from X piece of software to Y piece of software, but in the middle, you have to run it through converters. You have to check the headers manually, things of that nature. That's an example where, like, okay, this obviously could be working better. Let's see if we can structure it as a problem. That's the starting point. We have a lot of ideas, I'd say. Where they often get stuck is level 2, which is, do we have the data that we can actually, data that would help someone solve this problem, and data that we can release to a public without an extremely complicated reviews process? Or is there data we could generate synthetically? And so once we have that, the data and sort of the idea of the problem, then it just becomes structuring. Okay, what does success look like here? In the example I mentioned, I think success looks like, in that case, like, oh, I can take this file, pump it into this tool, this black box, and it does that header verification. It does that cleanup manually. And the input file looks like X, the output file would look like Y. And then we can define that as a challenge and go from there. But it's definitely a funnel. It takes a lot of work to get things from the, like, hey, this is a problem, to this is something we're going to actually put in front of people in the wild.
Awesome. With that, and you described a little bit of process, I'd love to hear if you have any tips for anybody here that would want to participate.
Oh, sure.
And curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about this space is that, we're not the only ones kind of starting to venture more in the crowdsourcing world. There's a lot of really neat competitions. If you kind of keep your eyes open, there's a couple message boards that promote different challenges. There's a lot of opportunity, and with a lot of newer and smaller platforms like Zeek, you're not up against 3 million people like you would be on Kaggle. The chances of winning are substantial if you put in the work. Some tips I would give, it's very important to sort of scope your work out in advance, much like product development or engineering work. Scope creep, feature creep can derail a whole project. So sort of starting from the point of where you want to get to, what you want to achieve, very important. Reading all the evaluation criteria and making sure you understand them, very important. And then third, I would say really engaging where you have questions. So on Zeek and on other platforms, we make a real effort to be as available as we can. There's forums where you can talk to other contestants. We answer all our emails, as rapidly as we possibly can. We conduct office hours to take questions live and talk through any problems people are having. Taking advantage of that help, can really juice your solution another 10, 20% because it's an opportunity to really understand what people are looking for.
And we're getting close to time, but I'm curious, one question that might be interesting for this group is, do you have any ideas or any perspective on interesting trends and the challenges that those might bring in and around crowdsourcing?
Sure. I mean, I think a couple of things come to mind. We talked a bit about the potential, in the Web 3.0, smart contracts, buzzword central, the potential there to create more compelling financial incentives for different folks. I think that will, enabling folks to share in the spoils when these solutions go into a business environment, I think is very compelling. I think you're seeing a lot more pickup on really big crowdsource challenges. X Prize is a great example. You see Elon Musk putting money towards the latest X Prize. I think you'll continue to see, really big initiatives around really big problems. That's something that excites us at Studio X too, which is just what if we had this very open-ended but very big initiative to just bring in people that maybe otherwise wouldn't consider such a challenge. I think you'll continue to see movement in that space. And then I think you'll also see crowdsourcing be on the smaller scale become even more of a regular business function. So looking broadly at the workspace, I think we've become quite comfortable with contracted labor, temporary labor. You look at Upwork, platforms of that nature, bringing in specialized talent as you need it. I can imagine a future where you also try to bring in a diversity of specialized talent as you need it. So we're looking for someone to write an algorithm to do X, Y, Z. Why not bring in 3 people to do that? It's obviously not the full crowdsourced effort, but in bringing in multiple perspectives to bring in that creative output that in theory will generate a better end solution.
Got it. Thank you. I think we're right about time. I want to thank everybody here, Austin Startup Week, Jessica, and you guys for listening to us ponder the past and the future of crowdsourcing and how it applies to AI. Please feel free to connect with us by all social media means, and we're happy to answer any questions there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for all of your insights. And thank you, Paul, for moderating. I know I've definitely learned a ton. The main takeaways that I took were crowdsourcing can be used to scale simple tasks or problems or large-scale problems like X Prize and the $1 Million Challenge. It's honestly a fantastic hack for managing your R&D expenses and I think that would be fantastic for startups. Some of the interesting early efforts have been using crowdsourcing to develop the first Oxford English dictionary, asking the crowd, how do you commonly describe terms, all the way to Netflix, right? And you have that DARPA challenge. And some of the, how to bring these business value from crowdsourcing. Jessica talked about the 3 components, and one is getting the data and structuring that information, determining what is actually good, and then finally taking that output and being able to translate that back into business impact will always be at the heart of driving value from crowdsourcing. So thank you for such an illuminating talk. We're now going to transition into our networking and hop-in. To network with other attendees, press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen, and you'll be randomly paired with another attendee, and we'll have 5 minutes to chat with that person. If you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, click the connect button at the bottom of your screen, and you will both receive an email from Hopin, so you can connect. Hello, welcome to our last session, which is driving business success with data, and where to start. So high quality data can help scale your business and accelerate growth and streamline processes. Data is the key to success in any field, whether you're developing cutting edge technology or running a chain of coffee shops in your hometown. So crowdsourcing is a popular technique for obtaining high quality data, and its key differentiators being a fast turnaround, lower cost, and incredible scalability. So in this tutorial today, crowdsourcing experts from Toloka AI will show you how data can be used to solve business challenges. They'll go over collecting the content, getting data annotated, and helping data-informed decisions using crowdsourcing based on real use cases pulled from Toloka's 10 years of experience in data-driven technology and businesses. So let's bring up our speakers for this next lineup: Andy Braun, Daria Madukova, and Marat Yakubov. Hope I said those names properly, but yes, thank you, and take it away.
Hi, Navira. Andy, you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Andy Braun. I am our Director of Global Accounts here at Toloka. And unlike my colleagues, I was able to make it to Austin today. We're here starting our new site, and I'll be visiting often. And I hope to meet a lot of you at the various events. But I would like to introduce Daria and Dimitri. Daria is going to share with you some of the real world cases that we have and how you can apply Toloka to make your businesses more efficient. And then Dimitri will follow up with a cool demo, and he'll show you all about Toloka apps. And then we'll have Alexi join in a bit to also answer any questions you have. Take it away, Daria.
All right, thank you, Andy. So let me share my screen. And Dimitri, maybe you can let me know if you see my screen all right, and if you see my slides.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, cool. So hi everyone. Andrew, thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you all for joining us. I know maybe it's been a long day for you guys, and we are running last. And I know for those who are offline, there has to be some kind of like networking and drinks. So thank you all very much for taking your time to listen to our talk. So our next 30 minutes will look kind of like this. So first, I'll tell you why high quality data is essential for the AI products. Then I'll share with you different industry use cases, which I hope will be very applicable to what you do in your life. Then I'll talk a little bit more about Toloka, like about our platform. And then Dimitri will show a real-time demo of how to label the data in real time. And after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. So let's go. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. So first of all, for those who don't know us yet, Toloka is a crowdsourcing platform. We are operating globally, and we're serving requesters who are mainly data scientists, startuppers, researchers, managers from all over the world. Those are the people that actually has to collect and label large amounts of data. And we have performers also from around the world. Those are the people who come to our platform, and we have around like 200,000 monthly active performers, and they label or collect small pieces of data. So also a couple of words about myself. My name is Daria, and I am curating different educational projects in Toloka. So basically, our main goal is to popularize crowdsourcing everywhere. We help our requesters to integrate crowdsourcing in different AI pipelines in their companies. And also my team and I, we conduct courses on crowdsourcing at different top universities worldwide. And we are really proud to say that we take part in different top data science conferences all over the world with our tutorials and workshops. And again, we are really excited to be here. And by the way, we have a course on crowdsourcing on Coursera. So if you're interested, check it out. So let's start with an actual real life use case that is very familiar, I think, to all of us. So a couple of years ago, COVID-19 has dawned on the world, and of course, the AI community, rushed to demonstrate the power of modern AI, and to also, of course, to solve this horrible issue. And the AI community, of course, proposed, a number of different models that could potentially, I would say, detect COVID in lungs, and of course improve the diagnostics process. However, this really wasn't such a straightforward case, even though the community could build different models. And there was a lot of data coming from China as the virus spread, primarily from over there first. However, many tools were built using mislabeled data and data from unknown resources. Like the data was mislabeled just because the doctors really had to label data while they were curing the actual patients. And of course, the quality of that data was really poor. And again, like as I said, a lot of data was coming from really unreliable resources. And as a result, due to that poor data, there were useless or even dangerous diagnostic tools that really didn't help at all. And if we think that, for example, the data was reliable, on the other hand, I'm sure that we could, maybe came up with different cures much faster. So this was a very illustrative example how data and high quality data is imperative in our lives. But if we don't only concentrate on COVID-19, really labeled data is very needed at every single step of machine learning production pipelines. Whether you need the data to train your models, whether you need the data to validate your models, to control how your models really behave in real time, to see whether your product is really executing to the highest standard, for example. And also the data is critical to retrain your models and to upgrade your product or service. So once again, ML products and even any data-driven decisions, they really require stable and fast inflow of high-quality data. And oftentimes, just because technology is not really that that advanced yet, human labeled data is needed pretty much at every single step. And crowdsourcing is actually a very cool and applicable and efficient tool for such data that needs to be labeled or collected, daily on very large volumes and at a very low price. So let's jump into the real use cases so that you can see how we apply and how other companies who use AI apply crowdsourcing for their cases. So we can maybe categorize those cases into three different spheres. So first is content collection, the second is data annotation, and the third one is business decision making. So let's take a look at every one of them separately. So first is content collection, and first case I wanted to show you, and this one is a very intuitive one. For example, you are developing different voice assistants or chatbots, and in order to train this kind of assistant, you have to gather a lot of phrases or a lot of wake words or something. And of course, to generate those wake words, for example, from people who sit all around the world, who have different accents, who are coming from different backgrounds, you'll probably use crowdsourcing to do this fast and efficiently. Also, for example, if you want to enrich your data, for example, if you have an e-commerce store or you have some kind of online movie theater or something else where you have to constantly enrich your content and write different descriptions. Crowdsourcing, surprisingly, can also be useful here. You just ask your performers to write short text or copyright short text or something else. And another very, I would say, non-trivial example of data collection is data collection from offline, or as we call feet on street crowdsourcing. This is usually used for e-commerce or for maps. So this is the type of crowdsourcing when a performer has to actually go to a certain location, either a restaurant or a coffee shop or something else, and take a photo of either like a business hours to update the maps, or take a photo of their menu to update the menus for, you know, some either maps or e-commerce, or check the prices or something else. So this is about, you know, data collection from offline. Another very popular examples of why crowdsourcing can be useful is, of course, for annotating the data for AI, like machine learning algorithms. The first example is, of course, object segmentations for computer vision. And here you can see two examples for completely different products. On the left, you can see a lake segmentation for maps. Like this was a photo from a satellite, for example, and we asked to annotate a lake. And on the right, you can see an example of annotating different objects on the streets for self-driving cars. And as you can see, the complexity of all those cases is very different. On the right, it's a very complex case, but it's still solvable with the crowdsourcing. Another data that could be annotated and used for different products is, of course, audio transcription. This is, again, mainly used for voice assistants. It's just because whenever you want to train your voice assistants to different languages and maybe accents, it could be a great way to do that. Also, of course, we could use crowdsourcing to highlight different parts of the world, and also even to validate the auto translate. We know that right now, pretty much, I think everybody uses machine learning translation, either it's Google Translate or something else. And we know that it's not perfect, not always perfect. So sometimes crowdsourcing can be very helpful, you know, to make it more useful and perfect. And also, I think the last one for the data annotation is the moderation of user-generated content. For example, you are having a website with different reviews, or you have a website where you would have different comments. And of course, you cannot let to have, for example, hate speech on your website, or you don't want to have any spam or anything. So here, crowdsourcing could be a great example of human in the loop, where you would ask performers to check your site for spam constantly every single day. And if they see anything suspicious, they would just flag it, and then you will get rid of this. And the last segment of crowdsourcing applications I wanted to talk about is product decision making or market research. You know, like, since at crowdsourcing you deal with so many different people with so many different, you know, backgrounds and intentions, it's great, you know, to ask them their opinion, and, you know, to also integrate it in your product development. So, for example, one of the real life use cases that we used in Toloka, we made a rebranding around a year ago, and in order to you know, to actually come up with a new logo, we had to ask the Tolokers, like, which one did you like more. So here you can see a real life examples, like, of a side-by-side task. And this could be applied not only for design, it could be applied to you know, to different, like, new products, or even ideas, or even like on the level of conceptual stuff. So you know, side by side is very common for crowdsourcing too. Another thing is using crowdsourcing for SMM. You could even build in the crowd into your like SMM pipelines. replying to different messages from your users and stuff, and engaging them with performers. And the last one, but like it's quite obvious one, of course, you can use crowdsourcing for different studies or surveys, whatever you need. You can get most of demographics on those crowdsourcing platforms. So now, I just showed you many different examples. However, probably you want some numbers, so I'll give you 3 different use cases from our clients. So first use case was done for online travel agency, and they wanted to constantly check whether a web page with their hotels, with a number of different hotels, contained booking information or not. So they used Toloka for that, and they labeled 2,000 labels in 5 hours with 94% quality. Another client was an e-commerce website, and they had a huge catalog that they have to update daily, and also they wanted to improve their recommendation systems for their online users. So they used crowdsourcing and they used Toloka, and here they labeled a couple of thousand labels in 11 hours with 98% quality. And the last example I wanted to share with you is the object segmentation tasks that we had to prepare for a smart device company. They basically just wanted to scale their production of label data. They had an internal crowd, but they understood that this was not really scalable or efficient, so they tried crowdsourcing. And we labeled their images with bounding boxes in less than 2 days with 93.5% quality. So probably you might be wondering, how could you get this much data with a over a quite short period amount of time with a very high quality? How is this possible? We know that right now, using crowdsourcing is not that difficult anymore. There are many crowdsourcing platforms all over the world, and getting the data, just data, it's not that it's not that complex. Much more complex is to get the high quality data, and that's what the market is going after right now. Is that because the better quality data you have as a product, the more competitive advantages you have in the market. However, achieving something above 90% really requires a new approach. It is a challenge in the market, and that's why we came up and we launched a solution which is called Toloka App Services. So Toloka App Services, which you will see in I think 5 minutes, is basically an easy-to-use preset data labeling pipeline where we also use some pre-trained models. We have many different use cases and templates that you can try for yourself, either for, again, classification or maybe transcription or something else. And as I said, crowdsourcing, classical crowdsourcing, and if you are familiar with this, usually it requires 6 very large steps. First, you have to think about how to decompose the task. Then you have to think about what kind of instructions and how to write them clearly so that those anonymous people actually understand you. Then you have to build an interface, which sometimes requires some coding. Then you have to think about different quality control schemas, how to control those people you don't really know. And then you have to think about the pricing. You never know what price is too much, what price is too little. And of course, then you have to work with the results, think about different aggregation models. And these 6 steps, it's already a lot. And then you have to account here getting to know the crowdsourcing platform. Believe me, we train the people, and sometimes it takes a lot of time to actually learn how to use a crowdsourcing platform, and then it takes a lot of time to maintain the project. And Toloka App Services really removes 4 of those steps, or even more. You really don't have to learn how to use those platforms. You just have to think about how to decompose your high-level tasks into smaller steps. For example, if you want to maybe label a lot of data for computer vision, probably you just need to break it down a little bit more. And then you have to just think about how to write the instructions. So that's it. And all of those 4 steps are really taken by us. And in order to ensure high quality, like which is mostly like above 90%, we use under the hood not only Toloka performers, but also we use high skill specialists who all together work, according to the principles of crowdsourcing and automation. And as a result, Toloka apps, and we are really proud to say that it's 2 times faster and it has 40% lower error rate compared to other managed service solutions on the market. So we are really proud of it. So if you want to try it, here you go. And in the end, I just wanted to maybe give you a sum up of what I said, and also tell you a bit more about like our educational projects, of course, as well. So to sum up, ML products and all data-driven business decisions really require a lot of data. And the more high-quality data you have, the better the products you'll have, and the more competitive advantage they will have for sure. And crowdsourcing really is an optimal tool to get and collect and label that kind of data on a large scale. And Toloka really provides different instruments, and also Toloka apps could be one of the most applicable solutions for you. Again, about education, I just wanted to emphasize that we have many different initiatives to support startups and also researchers and academia. So please visit our website. We have grants programs. We have different pricing plans. And especially for startups, we offer free trial, and we also offer training. So when we train, we have the lecturers who have been doing crowdsourcing for more than like 10 years altogether. We have lecturers who have been practicing either like for search or self-driving cars or e-commerce or voice assistants. So we really love to share our knowledge and experience with you guys. So if you want to get the training, please let us know. Here are the promo codes for our platform. Please save it. We'll also duplicate it in our chat. And now we're going to have a real-time demo. Dmitry, please.
Yeah, thank you, Daria, for the excellent speech. Can we turn on my screen sharing? Yeah, thank you. Alexei, could you tell me if everything is fine?
Yes, that's all right. We see the screen.
Okay, so let's start. Yeah, and hi everyone, I'm Dmitry. I'm a crowd solutions architect at Toloka, and I'm going to show you how you can annotate your data without much effort and waste of time. And another good news is that you won't need in-depth crowdsourcing knowledge to do it. So first of all, let's define what task are we going to solve. Let's assume that we have news headlines and we want to classify them. So what are we going to do to get it done? It's quite simple. First, we have to create a project, then upload the data and get the results. So it seems really easy. So let's create one. Here we can see all the available apps. Each app covers a common annotation task, like text classification, bounding boxes, image classification, and so on. Let's scroll down a little bit. Here it is, text classification. Here we can see all the information about the app, like price per item, limitations, input data format. So let's choose it. So we got to the form. The form consists of 3 steps. The first is general project setup. The second is all about instruction. And the last one is final check. As you can see, I pre-filled the form, so we won't waste time. Here you can see that I specified language of our content, it's English. And I specified name of our project, it's classify news headlines. Name it carefully because it will be seen by performers. And then we have some options that depends on the app we are using. So let's move on to the instruction. Here we have the instruction for performers. Be careful and mention all the corner cases so your performers always will know what to do in any situation. Then we specified classes for our headlines like business, politics, weather, health, and we have class other. Then we provided at least one example on each class, but the more examples, the better. So don't forget to prepare them. Let's go to the final check. Here we are checking that everything is correct. Yeah, looks good. Let's create it. Yeah, the project was successfully created, and now it's in status pending, which means that the project is on moderation. Now we can upload our data. To do this, we need to create a batch. Yeah, and here we should type in the name of our batch. Let's name it like my first batch. Then we should to upload our data. We can do this in 2 ways. We can do it with TC file or just copy and paste. I have a TC file. Let me just drag and drop it. Yeah, here it is. We're good to go. Yeah, the batch was created and now it's in use status. We have some controls of the batch, so we can launch it. Here we can see the final price of annotation of this batch annotation. If you are sure that everything is correct, only then you should launch the batch. So we are sure. Yeah, now it is in the processing status, and the actual annotation will start when the project will pass the moderation. Again, to save our time, I have pre-annotated all the same batch and project. So we just switch to another tab. And now we can see the results. So we see that the project in active status and the batch is completed. So I launched it several hours ago. We can see that all the time that annotation time is 1 hour and a half, so not really long. We can see all the items in the batch. We can click on an item and we see the results. So like our text and the corresponding class. So that's it. We can download results with TC file. Yeah, and so that's all. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will annotate your data with Toloka apps, because it has never been so easy. So also we have API and Python library for automation. So you are welcome to ask questions. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. I think I will be the main guy to answer the questions. By the way, I also have made it to Austin, Texas. Nice city, great weather, much better than in in our places. So let's get started then. The first question is, do you mean the data is crowdsourced, or is the data made usable by crowdsourcing the cleanup? Actually, depending on the case, you can either collect data with crowdsourcing or and make it more useful by labeling it. I hope that I answered the question. So the second one is how was quality measured? In that case, it was 94% quality for hotels classification. So for all the classification tasks, we prepare control tasks with our private crowd working for Toloka, and those experts they label the data, some part of it, something around 10% of the data, and then we use it to control whether Tolokas are sincere or not, and if not, we ban them. But some people sometimes make mistakes, so by using those control tasks, we measure how often users, Tolokers, make mistakes, and this is our estimation of the quality eventually. The next question is how are labelers motivated through Toloka? That is critical question. Actually, in my opinion, our platform is the most user-friendly platform in the world, and we motivate them firstly and most importantly by letting them have some revenue. We also have some bonuses. We enable our clients to give bonuses for good work, and we just make a good product actually for Tolokers, and it is important for us to make sure that our Tolokers are happy.
I can also maybe add to Alexei here. Again, like, yes, like the well-being of Tolokers really matters a lot. And apart from, you know, giving an opportunity to have some revenue and building a product that adheres like to higher standards, we have different like motivational tricks. Sometimes we give out different like tokens or like you know, achievements as we call them, and like in a game, like it looks kind of like gamification. So for example, if Toloka has passed the training, he gets like a token. If he has done many different tasks, he's gonna get a token, and so on and so forth. And we also sometimes encourage, of course, with a prize. So Talokers who put much more effort and who get higher ratings, they're gonna probably get paid higher. So there is like an actual like monetary incentive here too.
Yeah, thank you, Daria. That's correct. And also, the last question for now is what is moderation status? Are there manual checks done by Toloka team before the task goes live? Yeah, we have several steps here under the moderation label, actually. Firstly, we check whether there are any mistakes, typos, or whether a client just mixed the data set or categories. So we make sure that it is all right. And also, for some cases, we conduct some small fixing on our site without like asking client, because in the cases when we are sure that it is what needs to be done, so a client doesn't need to worry about it. And that is what we do also with our assessors. This is like the top experts of our project crowd, whose specialty is such work. Okay. So I don't know whether there are any other questions or not. Can you help me
There are
with that?
more questions. Yeah, I don't see anything for now. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question. How are labelers motivated through Toloka? I
it's
think
the
that
same
we
one.
just answered that question. Yeah.
Yeah, so if there are more questions, please keep them coming.
Okay.
Just a second. There are other questions, but unfortunately, like the speakers, they don't see them. So I guess we're getting help. Just a second. So there are questions. So Lyosha, let me just read them out, okay? How do you get your private labeling crowd to create the control cases so quickly?
Oh, actually, we have a pretty long history of creating private crowd. The initial company, we do data labeling for more than 13 years now. And yeah, we have huge crowd, and we have processes around like hiring people, setting them up, motivating them. It is we use actually some local replica of Toloka interface to where those assessors do their tasks. So maybe so that is my answer. Okay.
So there is another question. What are some of the most interesting or bizarre types of data sets you were asked to build or label? Alexei,
Okay.
you guys want to start? I have
yeah, let's start. And
yeah, I can
I'll think about it.
Like I didn't really have to label it, but it's one of our requesters. The person was labeling different feet, you know, to improve computer vision algorithms for like e-commerce, which was selling shoes. And I just think that, you know, labeling many different feet, it's just kind of bizarre. Well, it's something that just came to my mind. But I'm sure that you know, when and we, you know, as people who work at Toloka, we usually check Toloka as performers as well, and we check sometimes, you know, like what kind of projects are being sent, you know, to the platforms, and sometimes it is bizarre. Yes, one of the bizarre cases was taking a photo of a person who fell from a sofa. I clearly remember that case, and to get that kind of photo is quite difficult. You know, you either have to fall from a sofa yourself, or you have to throw someone from sofa. So and sometimes, you know, like record a dog barking, record a baby crying, you know, to train some kind of like voice assistants and stuff. So you know, the tasks can be pretty can be pretty unusual. Yeah, it's actually a great question. Thanks.
Yeah. Another unusual case was when a client asked to label webcam pictures, and they needed to count the number of cows they have there. So it sounds strange, but it actually makes total sense to keep track of your animals on the farm. Yeah, so we have other questions now.
Yeah, so the last one, is your labeling crowd located in a certain geography or spread out globally? Do you want me to take this question, Alexei?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so our crowd is indeed spread out globally, and we are present in many geographies, starting from South America, through Europe, through some African countries, of course, through Asia, India, and also, of course, back to the US and Canada. So we have performers pretty much all over the world now who speak many different languages. Our primary and most popular languages are English, Russian, Spanish, French, and German, I believe. And also, like, we have very rare languages as well. So even like we have languages that are spoken in Iceland, for example, too. So if you're interested in some particular languages, let us know. But we are present pretty much everywhere globally. It just depends, of course, on the density. And you might think, of course, the more density, like in developing economies. However, we have performers scattered all over the globe. And Arabic is pretty popular language as well, by the way. Yep.
Yeah, there is another question. How do you get your private labeling crowd to create the control cases so quickly? Yes, it is.
Yeah, I guess it's being
yeah, that is actually control tasks are the main differentiator for Toloka app services as a part of Toloka, because this is what takes a lot of effort usually for any client.
Okay, and Losha, just we have 5 minutes remaining, and there is one question I'm told. So how do people find out about Toloka and join? What's your recruiting strategy? I suppose this is for performers, not for requesters, because for requesters we do a lot of different like marketing, and of course like we have our sales team at Austin Startup Week, of course. But for Talokers as performers, we do have a lot of experience as a company with online, advertisement, online campaigns. So whenever we have to gain and attract Talokers, for example, from Japan if we need, or from like Arabic-speaking countries or Spanish-speaking, we just run campaigns like in social media or in like search or somewhere, and that's how we attract performers. And then we also test them for languages if needed, and so that's how we deal with performers from all over the world. Hope I answered your question. And I don't see any more.
Yeah, but I didn't answer mine actually.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, that's okay. So how do you get to your private labeling crowd to create control cases so quickly? So I think the main advantage we have here is a really big crowd, internal crowd, and very useful system that delivers tasks. So we can give this, for example, those 20 labels that Dmitry just showed us were labeled probably by 10 or maybe or even more of private labelers, and if it was like more, there would be more private labelers with some overlap, because we're even though we trust our private labelers a lot, much more than Talokers, we still for control tasks we want to be sure, like in most cases. So that is why we have overlap for them too. So it is just the right answer is, the correct answer is big internal crowd, and also they work around the clock. So they we in a way we control that there is always some number of private crowd people on the line, so we can have service 24/7.
right? Joshua, again, sorry for interrupting you. I think we are mostly out of time.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, as well. Thank you, Andy, Daria, Alexi, and Dimitri, for joining us today and talking to us about Toloka and how you all are solving data needs for companies by going direct to the crowds and helping startups around the world get their hands on hard-to-find data sets. You provide the ultimate tools and resources to collect and label this quickly and efficiently and making it possible for so many founders to start their dreams. So thank you for all of that. And with that, I also want to conclude this amazing AI track session for Austin Startup Week. I want to thank all of our amazing speakers for coming to the AI and data science track. I know you all are busy founders, leaders, and engineers. So I really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us today. I also want to give a big, huge shout out to the Austin Startup Week and Capital Factory teams for pulling together such an amazing conference year after year.